All of the classes so far I've been live streaming. You just go to that impactbrokercoach.com, which is also, you can look it up just through a YouTube search and look under the live heading, not the videos heading, because it'll look like there's nothing in there. There's a couple things, there's several, but not the live streams. Those have their own headings, which I don't really like, but that's how they do it. Okay, good. Here we go. Now, let's take a look at this Quizlet. Here we go. I think I'm sharing. Okay, let me share so it maybe looks a little more clear. And there we are. This first one I've made, only one so far, is about agency, so that's appropriate. So let's take a look at it. And again, you can find other ones by other authors. They may be other instructors, they may be other students, but if you just do a Quizlet search, let me show you where that would go. Just pull up Quizlet.com. You can click in it up here at the top. And I would just use the book, right? Modern Real Estate, 10th edition. It's actually Modern Real Estate of North Carolina, 10th edition, but let's see if this pulls it up. Probably need to put a little more. See, I already found a mistake. It's not fee sample, is it? Fair warning. But mine is this one. And you can just find it, I believe. What have I called myself? I called myself many things. Some nice, some not nice. I'll put the link in Notion. That's probably the better way to do it. But here it is. When make our way back here, you can set it to just give you the word first and then the definition, or the definition first and then the word. But I'd probably set that. Oops. There it is. The relationship between a firm and its principal. The firm and its principal is this thing called agency, right? And then who is the actual agent? Who's the agent? Tell me in the chat. Oh, put your name in the chat if you haven't yet, please. Thank you, thank you. There's everybody. Wonderful. Okay, yeah. So what is the actual agent? Who or what is the agent officially? In real life, when we're just talking, we're thinking humans. But for our purposes here in pre-licensing class, Tony Clark Firm, there it is. You combined them. Love it. Good job. The agent is the firm, the real estate firm itself, not the human broker. There you go. And then the minimum number of brokers that are involved in this thing called designated dual agency. What's the least amount of brokers that can be involved in a designated dual agency situation? I'm going to have at least this many. Here's a hint. It's either one or two. Which one is it for designated dual agency? It's got to have at least how many humans? Got about an even match of answers there. Designated dual agency. We learned about that second. That might be the best way to remember it. Just a silly little memory aid. We learned about designated agency after we learned about what dual agency is. Designated is another form of dual. But we learned about true dual agency as number one. That was the first thing. And therefore, the minimum number of agents that could be involved in a dual agency transaction, there I go using the word agents, sorry. The minimum number of humans with a license is one. And that's also happens to be the first type of dual agency we learned about. Then we got in, because you needed to know what dual agency was first. Then we got into some nuance to it. And let's revisit. So the first thing we talked about was, what is dual agency? It's this thing that happens when a broker is working for both buyer and seller. They have an agency agreement with both of them. Is a dual agent a listing agent? Is a dual agent a listing agent? Is that one of their titles in this transaction? Yes, it is. They have to be, because they have to be representing the seller. But how about this? Is a dual agent a buyer's agent? That too, because they're both, because they're dual, right? Too. And literally, and it's easy to get all caught up in the words and say, dual agency, is that also a buyer agent? And your brain to just freeze. But it is. That's what makes them a dual agent. The fact that they have both a listing agreement signed and a buyer agency agreement signed with two different people. They are both. And they're straddling the fence too. And that's not a comfortable place to be. But if anybody's ever walked a fence, right? It's real easy to fall off on one side or the other. Boy, this turned into a really good example. I didn't even plan it. Walking on the fence, right? Don't do it in real life, because if you fall off and break your leg, I will not be liable. But not easy. You could fall off on one side or the other. And in the dual agent sense, if you were to favor one side over the other, you've fouled, right? You've committed a foul. You've committed a problem. There's an issue. They're not going to be happy with you, because as a dual agent, you can't show preferential treatment to either side. You can't favor one side over the other, which gets awkward when you've met one of them and been working with one of them for longer, first and for longer, usually the seller. Because you just picture this, you listed the house before you ever met this buyer. They're not even on your radar. You never met them. You listed the house months ago. Someone hired you and your firm to sell their house, and you were the face of your firm because you're the sub-agent to the firm. Went out there, won the business. Your firm's happy with you because you earned a listing agreement. They signed with your firm because of the work you did. And so over these last couple of months that you've done things for the seller, they don't know your BIC. They don't know anybody else at your firm, this seller. They just know you. To them, you are your firm because you're the representative of it. And what have you been doing? You've been going to their house several times. You went over there either to take pictures yourself or to meet the photographer that you paid for to take the pictures and let them in, maybe while the owners were at work. You maybe met a stager. There are companies out there that make houses look pretty, and they do staging, right? They maybe even rent furniture if there's a need for extra furniture, but they will move the things around in the right place, in the right order, the right look, so that the pictures show nicely and the house itself shows nicely. You've done that. You may have met a repair person over there, again, for the owner, because the owners both work and you're the only one available. And guess what? Full service. That's your job. Let people in to do the work on the house that you've been hired to sell. That's not the stuff that shows up necessarily on the HGTV shows. You maybe met, maybe even the house cleaner before the pictures were taken. Of course, you had to measure the house or either hire someone to measure it and let them in to do so, right? So you've invested your time in this family, in this owner of this property, single or family, whatever. You've done work for them already. They've hopefully come to appreciate you and see you as that professional. So they're invested in you. You're their person. They hired you, and you've proven yourself by doing all this work. Again, for no money yet. You've come over there several times, met people, let people in. They've trusted you with the keys to their house. You put your sign in the yard, a box on the door to access the key, all for nothing yet. Because you do all that work up front. It's front loaded, and you're not getting paid for having listed the property until it sells and closes. You don't even have a buyer yet, and you've done all this stuff. And here we are 2 months later. You may have even done an open house or 2 or 3, by the way. Again, at your expense. Snacks, food, drinks, and taking good care of the house. And this is inevitable, guys. This is not in the syllabus, but this part's real life. At least once a quarter, depends on how busy you are with listings, a seller's going to call you and say, I've locked my keys in the house. I can't get in. Could you come over and let me in? Open the lockbox and let me in because I can't reach so-and-so. It happens quite a bit. I mean, we've got things to do also, but again, you're taking care of your people. So here we are 2 months later. They love you. You've proven yourself. And now a buyer calls off of your yard sign. And that buyer says, hey, I like the look of that house from the front. Can we set an appointment to see it? And you're going to, because of your experience and what you've learned from others, you're going to be thinking, I wonder if they have an agent. Because I don't want to show it to them if they have an agent. Because really, properly, their agent should show it to them. But also, I don't want to really waste my time if another agent who's going to get paid for representing them is available to show it to them. And between you and me and the whole world, sometimes agents don't do this full time, and that is fine. But if they are a part-time real estate agent, they might send their client to call the listing agents directly and go look at those listings without them while they're at work, effectively wasting your time, kind of. Now, if I'm a listing agent, I don't really consider it a waste. I want to show my property, show my listing, and heck, maybe I can sell it better than their agent can. If they do indeed have a buyer agent that just is too busy to show it to them themselves, at least if I show it to them, it'll be the person who knows the most about the house, even more so than their buyer agent. So good comes with the bad. But this time the buyer calls you and says, I don't have an agent. I really like the look of this house from the pictures you took and from the front. So can I come see it in person? And you're like, sure, of course. You're going to talk to them about one important thing before you get off the phone. And what is that? They've told you they like the house, which I'd say that's a want or a need, right? They've identified something they like. So the conversation is really quickly probably about to turn into some other types of information. So what do you need to stop the phone conversation about right now and address with them? Tell me. They've said, I want to make an appointment to come look at the house. That's a great question. Tony says, have you talked to a lender? Have you been pre-approved, pre-qualified? But what we're going to learn in the rest of chapter 7 tonight is the very first disclosure, the very first document that you interact with a consumer over, and it's called the Working with Real Estate Agents disclosure. Working with real estate agents disclosure. Before you ask them questions or let them tell you information that could affect their negotiating position, you've got to give them a warning. Say, hey, here's your warning, guys. Don't tell me anything you don't want the seller to know. Because right now, you should know the status of things is you are unrepresented. You have no agent. And I am the agent for the seller. And if you buy this house or make an offer on this house, saying something to me about your money or your motivation situation is like telling the seller directly. And that may be something you want to consider. Buyer, potential buyer client. And okay, you don't have an agent. Well, guess what? I could be that agent for you. Here you are on the phone talking to them. Fair warning, don't tell me anything confidential. And oh, by the way, if we all agree to do it this way, I could be your agent for this listing, even though it's my own listing. They're going to be confused, just like maybe you're confused right now. And they're going to say, well, how's that possible? How could you represent them and me both? And you'll say, it's something called dual agency. Dual agency. I'm already hired by the seller. I'm already the listing broker for the seller. You're interested in this house. If you end up deciding to make an offer on this house after we look at it, after I show it to you tomorrow or whatever you've set up, then I could be your buyer agent while still being their listing agent but under the parameters of this category called dual agency. If I'm working for you both, I'm limited. And that's the way I tell it to them. Frankly, guys, I can't do as much for you if I'm a dual agent, but I can get it done if you want me to. If you want this and you allow this to happen, meaning you, the buyer, also the seller has agreed to allow me to be one. Also, my firm has allowed me to be a dual agent. Also, I've decided I'm okay with doing it. All four approvals, then you can act this way. And here's the thing. There are very important duties that I owe to clients. And I'd go down through the list. You don't have to explain it like we do in class, but obedience, loyalty, disclosure, confidentiality, accounting, reasonable skill and care. Got to know what I'm doing. Got to keep secrets. That's confidentiality. And I got to follow the client's instructions and directions as long as those are lawful. But the loyalty one, I cannot do if I'm a dual agent. Loyalty is off the table if you allow me to be a dual agent, because I can't tell you, buyer, potential buyer, client, I can't tell you the lowest price the seller might be willing to take. But similarly, I also can't tell the seller the most you might have confided in me that you're willing to pay, because you might ask me to write up the offer for less than what you're actually willing to pay for it. That's how people do these things. You make offers lower than what you're really willing to come up to allow some negotiating room, whether it's cars or whatever. Houses, of course. So the confidentiality is still in effect, guys. Don't miss that one. They'll test you with that. You do owe both clients confidentiality when you're a dual agent. You've got to keep both of their secrets from each other. But you can't tell the secrets to the other party, even if they think that you're their person more than you're the other ones. The seller's going to maybe say, well, we've known you longer. We hired you to sell our house. Why can't you tell us what they're absolutely willing to come up to? Because you agreed to let me be a dual agent, which limits my loyalty to you. I'm not going to tell them the lowest you're willing to take, seller, but I also can't tell you the most they're willing to pay. See how that works? Goes both ways. Can't give either party an advantage over the other one. And this could still just be one little old broker in this position as a dual agent. I will sometimes call him a true dual agent. So that's dual agency. Good old-fashioned plain dual agency. One broker, at least one broker, between buyer and seller. Now, just because the minimum number is one broker, what if I'm one of those brokers who have a partner in the business? Or maybe even a team of 7 or 10 or 15. There's some big teams out there. We could all be a dual agent between the buyer and the seller. And that just means all of us give all of the old car fiduciary duties except for loyalty. All 7 of us have to keep the secrets of the seller from the buyer and the secrets of the buyer from the seller. All 7 of us cannot tell the buyer the lowest the seller might take, or the seller the most the buyer might be willing to pay. Is that making sense? We are all true dual agents. So don't learn it this way and mess yourself up. Don't think true dual agency means one broker and 2 clients, buyer and seller. They're in between. Well, yeah, but that's not all. It could be multiple brokers between the buyer and seller. Though it's not just has to be one. It's at least one. And then here's the other little twist to it. If you're a provisional broker, what does that mean? What's a provisional broker, by the way? What's a provisional broker? Who has a provisional broker's license? They're newly licensed. That's good. Can they be provisional forever? There we go. Now it's coming in. they start out being provisional. You will start out being a provisional broker. You're going to have a broker's license just like me and every other agent. We all have a broker's license. It's not like some of us have a salesperson's license and others have a broker license. That's the way we used to do it, and it's the way some states do it, but not anymore. In North Carolina, it's one broker license. It covers everything, but there's different categories. And so you will start out in that entry category of provisional. And then Libby says you have 18 months to get rid of it. And then she also says you get rid of it by taking 3 post-licensing courses, 3 30-hour classes. So here you are, a provisional broker. Can you be a provisional broker and do dual agency? Yes, you can. You can do most everything. There's a couple of things you can't do as provisional, but this is one of them that you can do. You can certainly be a dual agent with only a provisional broker's license. So there's that. As a provisional broker in the world of real estate, who's the most important person to you? Yeah, hang in there. We're going to get to it. And that's what I'm leading toward, but I don't want to confuse them too. So let me lay it out, and you're exactly right. We're going to talk about it. But you're welcome. Let's talk about this true dual agency thing. Who's the most important person? There it is, Talon, the BIC. Your BIC, they're responsible for you. You need to pick a good one, by the way, so that you can feel comfortable working with them, and you're going to be talking to them a lot. As you do deals, transactions, write offers, learn how to do this business, they're going to be your point person, your go-to. So if the firm is the agent, as it is, the agent is the firm, and there's a dual agency situation, then the firm is the dual agent. But so are the brokers within the firm. They're all dual agents. The brokers within a firm where a dual agency situation is taking place, all of those brokers are dual agents too. So you as a provisional broker and your BIC, are you both dual agents in this situation? Where you're a listing agent and a buyer has called you and they don't have an agent and you are acting as a dual agent, a true dual agent for both buyer and seller, your BIC is a dual agent too. And that's good. And that's allowed. We hope so. You're both on the same team, in other words, you and your BIC. You're both on the same team. You're both helping both the clients. You are also both limited in loyalty. Neither you nor your broker in charge can give either client loyalty. Neither you or your broker in charge can tell the seller the most the buyer might pay or the buyer the least the seller might take. You with me? Well, there's a recap of dual agency. Now, here's the next part of the process. While you're still explaining this to a buyer who has just called you, and they understand you've just told them you can't give them loyalty, they might say, well, that sounds terrible. Why would anybody ever do that? Well, why would I give up loyalty? Why would I hire you and you can't even help me get the best deal for the house? You can't tell me secrets of the seller if you were to know them. They might even say, well, in that case, I'll just go down the street to another brokerage firm, another real estate firm, find an agent there, hire them as my buyer agent, and then come back and make an offer on your listing. Then it's 2 separate firms. And then if that buyer agent I hire were to find out about your seller's confidential information, like the lowest they might possibly take, they could share it with me. So why wouldn't I do that? Well, first of all, what is the likelihood that anybody's going to know that information? So it's kind of a silly premise. I acknowledge that. But if they do say, well, that loyalty, I think loyalty is important. I don't want to give that up. I am going to go down the street, get my own buyer agent. I'll come back if I still want to and make an offer on your listing. I don't want to allow this dual agency thing. That sounds terrible. And when they tell me something like that, and I'm that listing agent, I will say, I get it. I totally understand, and you're right. Dual agency is not great. It exists because we can make it work for everybody, but there's definitely that loyalty limitation. However, I can save you the trouble, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer potential client. I can save you the trouble of leaving and going to the other firm, because you could stay here within my own firm, within this firm, and I can connect you with another broker here and make them your designated dual agent. So dual agency will still happen because the firm is the dual agent, but we're going to modify it. The firm is the dual agent, but within the firm, we're going to split off, and I will represent the seller of this house you like, and we'll connect you with a good broker in our firm to represent just you. And we can have that loyalty back. In fact, I'm going to connect you with a broker in our firm, and it's going to have to be a broker that does not know anything confidential about the seller, because again, it needs to be fair. So I could not designate a buyer agent for you that knows some secrets that the seller wouldn't want known. So once they qualify and they don't know any secrets about the seller, they could be your designated dual agent, your designated buyer agent. And if they're cool with that and it all goes well, then we can do so. We can assign them probably you would go to your BIC. You'd say to the BIC, look, I've got a situation. They don't want to do true dual agency. They want to have us designate a broker here within our firm. Who do you recommend? And your BIC would gladly step in and make a recommendation. Reach out to somebody. Say, so-and-so, would you be a designated buyer agent to buy her listing while she is the listing agent for that seller? So that's the designated dual agency one. Loyalty has been restored because it's two separate brokers again. Still the same firm, though. The firm is the dual agent still, but at least two brokers within the firm are designated for each individual side of the transaction. So loyalty's back, and what I'll say to them when I'm explaining it in real life, I'll say, we can treat it like it's two separate firms. It's at that level. We can behave as if it's two separate firms. If I were in a designated dual agency situation, let's say I'm helping the buyer, and that buyer wants to buy a listing in my same firm, and that there's a listing agent, not me, who's representing that seller, and I'm representing the buyer. I'm a designated buyer agent, designated dual agent out helping the buyer would be a better way to say it. If somehow maybe I were to find out a secret about the seller after I'm already hired and in the position of a designated dual agent, maybe because the listing agent is not talking low enough in the hallway and I overhear them talking about the seller's situation, who knows? Or I see some file somewhere in the office that I shouldn't. That would not be great, by the way. I'm not advocating for that. I'm just listing possibilities of how this secret could come out. Or maybe it has nothing to do with the listing agent. Maybe I know somebody who knows the seller. Because in this social media world, it's easy to find out who knows who we know. We know people who know people. So maybe I'm friendly with somebody who's friendly with that seller, and I happen to be representing the buyer. But through my friend who also knows the seller, I find out that seller has listed it for $450, but they're getting kind of desperate and they would take $430. So if I were to find out a secret after I've become a designated dual agent, not only should I or could I tell my buyer client this information, I should legally. Because again, we're treating it like it's two separate firms. Do you feel queasy about that concept? Does that still seem weird and kind of like shaky and like, well, gosh, if the parties found out about all this, they would not be happy? True. And so designated dual agency, while better than true dual agency, if secrets were to come out about the parties' motivations, a big question that could be presented if one of those parties complained to the real estate commission, the commission would ask, how did they find out? How did that secret come out? Was it because you didn't maintain the files within the firm properly? Did you not lock the file cabinet? Were one of those two designated brokers poking around where they shouldn't, looking in the file of the other party? That'd be a big problem. that you'd get disciplined over, and the firm would get disciplined too. So what the commission will say to firms is, when you are allowing designated dual agency, you better make sure you have your security in check. You better have file drawers locked. Don't let each party have access to the other party's stuff. When all this was brand new, and I was brand new because it happened at the same time, remember? Dual and buyer agency came out a year before I was brand new. The firm I was at, I remember this, within the first year when I was in the business, there was a bank of about 8 file cabinets, big, tall, 4-drawer file cabinets, and that's where all the client files were kept. They were not locked. And I remember thinking about this. If I had a dual agency situation, I could look at the file of all of the listings we've got. They figured this out shortly, pretty soon, and they actually started locking those, and the office administrator was the one with the key. So the agents just couldn't go pop over and look at anybody's listing file that wasn't their own listing. But that was a big issue, and it has become one. And ever since, firms better be really good about not letting the other party in a designated dual agency situation see things that are confidential of the opposing party. So does that make sense about the importance of this confidentiality, maintaining this stuff, and how loyalty is different in dual versus designated dual? We good there so far? Hang in there, because it'll come back around. So what about a designated dual agency situation? You're the provisional broker. And let me think, how best would this be? What if your BIC, who still lists and sells houses, by the way, because a lot of brokers in charge still do that. They act as a broker in charge, but they still have their own real estate business on the side. And they'll still list homes and help buyers. So your broker in charge lists a property for sale. They're the listing agent. A buyer calls them off of a sign, and your broker in charge needs to, that buyer doesn't want to do true dual agency. They only want to be they want to get their own designated broker. Can your BIC choose you to be the designated buyer agent? Can your broker in charge let you be the designated agent helping the buyer while they themselves is the designated agent listing and helping the seller as a provisional broker? That's the big no, right? That's the one that's no. But a lot of agents, even in continuing ed classes, get this wrong. This next question: can you, a provisional broker, be a dual agent alongside your broker in charge? That's not the same question, because one is about designated and the other is not. So a provisional broker cannot be a designated agent up against their BIC. They can't. Why? Because they're looking out for their own client, and they have to have somebody to confide in. They have to be able to confide in their BIC. But the BIC is looking out for the other side, and there's a big conflict of interest there. How could the BIC help the provisional through the transaction while still taking care of their own client? Yeah, big conflict, yeah. So designated dual agency is not allowed between a provisional broker being up against their own broker in charge. But true dual agency is not the same thing. True dual agency is not like designated. It's the opposite, really. True dual agency is still maintain confidentiality, keep everybody's secrets between the buyer and the seller, to keep the buyer's secrets from the seller and vice versa. But don't tell the seller secrets about the buyer, and don't tell the buyer secrets about the seller, which you very well may know. That's true dual agency. And that is okay for you to be a true dual agent alongside your broker in charge. You and your BIC are both limited in loyalty if you're both true dual agents. Does that make any sense? People get it wrong all the time. When you get out and get in the world and you're in a CE class and the broker, some teacher like me asks that sort of question, they always think designated. No, not allowed. But it's not just all dual agency that's not allowed for a provisional to work up against their BIC. Designated is the only one where you are up against another broker. True dual agency, you're alongside, you're on the same team. Neither one of you can tell buyer the lowest the seller will take. Neither one of you can tell seller the most buyer will pay. I'm intentionally repeating myself to hammer it in, because sometimes when I'm explaining it to you and you're still in that phase of confusion, it doesn't stick. But when it's like the light bulb goes off and then I say it again and you're like, okay, click. So that's what I'm after. So that's a recap of dual agency and designated dual agency. You can't be a designated dual agent if you're a provisional. You can't be one up against. And I say it that way because you're literally working against the other party, against the broker in charge, your own broker in charge. But the other combinations of designated are okay. Every other combination is okay. Meaning a non-provisional broker in the firm could be the listing agent, and you're the provisional, and that's allowed. You could be up against them in a designated dual agency situation. Remember, you're treating it like two separate firms again. Two non-provisional brokers could be up against each other. One designated to work for the buyer, the other designated to work for the seller. Two provisional brokers could be up against each other. That's the one that causes some confusion for people, because you're thinking, but both of those provisionals are going to confide in the same BIC. And how can that be okay? Well, just because they're both confiding in the same BIC doesn't mean the BIC is going to work one against the other. So just take it for what it's worth. Know that it is still allowable for two provisional brokers in the same firm to be designated dual agents against each other. That's allowable. And then a non-provisional can be up against their own BIC. It's allowable for a full broker, non-provisional broker, or on the test you might just see the word broker. All of those three variations mean the same thing. A broker who's not provisional, that person can go up against their own broker in charge in a designated dual agency situation. So, back to the original thing from 40 minutes ago. It was worth it. I feel like it's worth it. So, what's the minimum number of brokers involved in designated dual agency? Designated dual agency. There we go. It's two. Designated is the second thing we learned about. And it just so happens that two brokers, there's going to be at least one for the seller and one for the buyer. One designated to represent the seller, a second different broker human designated to represent the buyer. The firm is still the same firm of both brokers, and the firm is a dual agent, but there's one designated for each party in the transaction within that same firm. And that's the minimum. That could be, there could be teams. There could be a whole team, a team of 5 representing the seller and a team of 3 representing the buyer. So the minimum, that's why I say minimum. At least 2 broker humans are involved, one designated for buyer, another for seller, but there could be more. So when does a buyer agent have to disclose their agency status if they meet a seller or a seller's agent? When does a buyer agent have to tell who they represent? Hey, I'm the buyer agent. What's the moment in time that requires this disclosure? If they meet a seller, a listed seller, house on the market, or the agent of said seller. There's 2 choices: at first initial contact or at first substantial contact. And this will make more sense later tonight because we're going to get into that disclosure, that working with real estate agents disclosure. This is a little different. In normal, like if you're in an open house and you're the broker and you're representing the seller and a buyer comes into that open house, that's when you have to be watching for this moment in time in the conversation called first substantial contact. That's when you're looking for the point at which that stranger buyer, potential client, says something money or motivation related. So that's when you're just talking to a member of the public. First substantial contact, they've talked about something that they may not want the other party to know. If you're talking to a potential client, then you're at the point where they start talking about their ability to pay or their need, and then also their wants and needs in the house. Now you've got to stop the conversation and address this disclosure called the working with real estate agents disclosure, so you can tell them what their options are of working with you. But this one is a little different. What we're looking at on the screen says, when does a buyer agent have to disclose their agency status when they meet a seller or seller's agent, meaning a seller that is listed with someone else? For instance, you're the buyer agent and you agree with your buyer, you're going to go meet them at the house. They want to go look at some houses. We're going to meet at the first house. And you get there early and the seller is still in the house. They're not gone yet. Hopefully they leave. Better to show houses with no seller, because the buyer client feels more free to talk and think about it and envision themselves living there. But the seller's still there, which is okay because your buyer's not there yet. But you don't even notice and know that the seller's still there yet, because you just go up to the door because it's like 2 minutes till, and you go ahead and pull out your phone and open the app to open the lockbox. And you step in the front door. Of course, you say hello, and somebody says something back. And you're like, oh, somebody's here. It's never a good feeling. And the seller pops their head, and they're frazzled, and they've got a kid in each hand, and clearly they're trying to get out. And you're like, oh, I'm sorry, I'm the buyer agent. Take your time. Buyer's not even here yet. I was just going to have some lights on for him. I'll get out of your way while you finish getting your car loaded up and get out and leave, hopefully. That part you wouldn't say out loud. But that's what we're talking about. Maybe you show up to a showing early. You meet a seller who's already got their own agent that's a listed property seller. Or another scenario for this would be, and you notice, when did I do it? They didn't talk about their money or their motivation. That was initial contact. That was just first initial contact. Oh, I saw them. They saw me. Hey, who are you? Basically. Why are you in my house? I'm the buyer agent. You've disclosed at first initial contact. You don't wait for the seller to say, I really would like to get this sold by next month. Or, I say 4:30, but I'd really take 4:10. None of those things hopefully are going to happen for the good of that seller. So we're talking about, this one would be first initial contact. If you're talking to the seller or a listed seller or their agent, you're going to tell them who you represent. You're the buyer agent. Or maybe you're a sub-agent to the seller because they won't sign this buyer agency agreement. We'll talk about that too. Another scenario for this first initial contact disclosure of your status, who you represent, would be when you have shown the house and your buyer wants to make an offer on the house. And so you call the listing agent to tell them or to ask them questions. You want to ask them some questions before you write the offer. You need to know some things like, hey, seller, what would your seller like to see in this offer? This part's not in the syllabus. It's just good advice for real world. Before you write an offer, call the seller's agent, call the listing agent, because quite frankly, they might tell you some stuff that could be useful. They might tell you that the seller would really love to close a little later than normal. If they could stay in the house for 60 days instead of only 30, have like a closing that's 60 days out instead of the typical one, which tends to be 30 or 40 days, they might like your offer a lot better, your client's offer a lot better. So regardless, you're calling this listing agent to tell them, look, we've got some interest here. I think I'm going to be putting an offer together. What can you tell me about the wants and about the seller's situation? What could we put in this offer that would entice them to pick us? And that's okay, because hopefully they won't tell you anything they're not supposed to, but sometimes they do that too. But it's okay for you to ask. You're just asking, when would they like to close? Because we'd love to close as soon as possible, but if it's one of those cases where they would rather close later, this buyer can accommodate that. And if that pulls it all together, great. Let's do it. Or maybe you find out by asking them these questions that the seller is all about the price. The seller will wait forever if they can get the right price. So best offer wins. That's also good to know. Don't mess around. Now you can tell your buyer, we need to take this seriously. Let's not allow any wiggle room for negotiation. Let's just swing for the fences. Let's go with our best, strongest right out of the gates. And if you didn't know that information and came in not as strong as they could have, you're going to have a disappointed buyer. And then more now than ever, you want to call that listing agent to ask, are there multiple offers? Kind of goes hand in hand with that last question. Are there multiple offers on the table for the same reason? We may not want to go in with a low ball. If there's no other offers out there and they've been on the market for 9 months, and clearly they've got issues and showability issues, and you're going to know that your buyer has the luxury of making maybe a lower than typical offer, maybe an offer that let's experiment, see how desperate they are. So let's find out some info by calling that listing agent before we write the offer. And that's the point. Getting back to this question, you would call the listing agent. You'd say, hey, I just showed your listing to a buyer client. I'm the buyer agent. What can you tell me about the seller situation that would be helpful in us writing a good offer that they're going to like? I'm not asking what the highest offer on the table is either, by the way. But I could. It's okay to ask that question. It's just that a listing agent can't tell me the answer unless the one who made the highest offer were to give them permission to say it. But again, first initial contact is when you have to disclose your agency status if you're talking to a listing agent or a listing owner, a seller who has their house listed. But typically, the answer to the question, when does a real estate broker have to disclose the choices or the agency status, the fact that they're a listing agent, for instance, to the general public, that one is at first substantial contact. Subagent. What are some examples of subagent? What is a subagent? There's two types. By the way, here's the link to this Quizlet. Copy and paste that and use it. Do it on your own. We won't go through this whole thing together, but you can use that later for yourself as a quiz. So a subagent is an agent for an agent, right? And there's two of those situations. We could have a broker being the subagent for their firm. Good job. Because you have authority on behalf of your firm to sign the listing agreement or to sign the buyer agency agreement, to sign things. You could also be a subagent if you're a broker working with a buyer and that buyer will not hire you as their buyer's agent. If they won't sign a buyer agency agreement with you, then by default, you remain what you were to begin with, and that is a subagent to the seller. You are only a buyer agent if it has been expressly agreed that you're going to be one. If you don't even talk about it, well, there's a problem by itself. But if you don't even talk about it, your default role working with the buyer is as subagent to the sellers, whatever sellers there are of however many houses you showed to that buyer. So subagent to seller. And then that brings up that crazy phrase that freaks people out. Something like that might show up on a test. Something like this. The selling agent working with a buyer as a subagent to the seller. So on and so forth. That phrase, if we were to dissect it, the selling agent. Well, when we read that for that part of it, we know this is the one who's helping the buyer in some way or another. Selling agent helping the buyer. Okay, it's on the buyer's side. They're not helping the seller, they're helping the buyer. We know this because of the word selling, ing, selling. The selling agent helping the buyer as what? As a sub-agent to the seller. In other words, they are not a buyer's agent for that buyer, but they can still help them. They can still show them houses. They can still write up an offer on their behalf. Find out what they want to make an offer for and fill out the paperwork. Sign here. I'll go present it to the listing agent. So that's another type of sub-agent to the seller in that particular situation. However, how can we avoid this, being a sub-agent to the seller while working for a buyer? What are the other choices? Instead of being a sub-agent to the seller while working for a buyer, what are the better choices for that buyer? For you to represent that buyer as. Instead of being a sub-agent to seller, what else? Instead, you could be anybody? Guesses? If you're not a sub-agent to the seller while helping this buyer, but they see the value in having you and hiring you, then they could hire you as their own agent. What is that called when the buyer hires you as their own agent? Not necessarily dual agency. It'd only be dual agency if it's a listing in your same firm. But just in general, you're showing them houses listed by all firms everywhere. An agent hired by the buyer to represent the buyer exclusively is a buyer agent, right? So you could either be a sub-agent to the seller helping the buyer, or you could be a buyer agent helping the buyer. Either one of those could be your role. And the second choice is the better choice for everybody. Because why wouldn't a buyer want to hire an agent to be their complete representative, their all-encompassing, their person, only for them? They owe all of the old car fiduciary duties: obedience, loyalty, disclosure, confidentiality, accounting, and reasonable skill and care. It's just that agents do a bad job of explaining the benefits sometimes. Or the buyer got burned by an agent who wasn't a good one, who didn't take it seriously, didn't do it properly, and abused the client, and therefore now they're skittish about hiring another one. Although there's not a ton of reasons. It all kind of usually gets boiled down to two or three reasons as to why a buyer doesn't want to hire that broker as their buyer's agent. What is it about this buyer agency thing, by the way? What if they say to you, well, it sounds good. I understand. I'm the buyer, client, potential client. You've explained to me, you're the provisional broker in this case, doesn't matter, but a broker, I'm talking to you. And maybe I met you at the coffee shop and I noticed that you had some real estate business open, and maybe I overheard your phone call and we struck up a conversation, and you're, of course, being a good agent, always looking for another client. So you engage and you're talking, and they say to you, well, I can appreciate the value of having my own broker, just one person, because I've done a little bit of this before. I've called lots of the different listing agents. A lot of buyers start out they think that they have to call each individual agent for every listing they have an interest in. And that's exhausting. That means they've got to just be on guard. Are they going to confide in every one of all of those? Maybe it's 10 houses they found on Zillow or wherever, and they just start calling listing agents. Well, that's no fun. And you can explain to them, well, you don't have to do that. You get to have your own single one broker who represents just you no matter what you buy. You can have me as your buyer's agent, and I will work for you to help you buy the best house, not just the one that you found on that one place, not just the one you drove by, not just the one that your cousin told you about, or even the for sale by owner listing down the street from you, or even new construction. I can help you with all of it, any of it. And whether it's me, this is what I'll tell them too. Whether it's me or another broker, you should have a buyer agent for yourself, your very own agent. Don't work with a broker that's a sub agent to the seller or the listing agent to the seller, because they're not looking out for only you. You need somebody looking out for only you in your best interest. That kind of helps them understand the perspective, understand what is your role here. You're telling them that your role is to look out for them and only them. Then you could expand that. Well, there is a situation that you would have the freedom to allow or not allow. But if it turns out that you wanted to buy one of the listings that are in my firm, there's another thing that could happen called dual agency, by the way. And then you go on into explaining that. But for the most part, if they want to look at 45 different houses, each with a different firm, it'd be exhausting to call 45 different listing agents and set up 45 showings and have to meet all those different individuals. Or they could hire you as their only one and only buyer agent, and now you're going to set up those showings. You're going to set those appointments. You're going to let them into all of those different places and look around and help them understand why this one's not a good choice, because maybe the lot is shaped funny. And as a good broker, you're going to help them buy it now with the thought of selling it later. You want them to buy it with the consideration of how hard would it be for you to sell it whenever that is. I'm not telling you have to sell it next year, but even in 10 or 20 years, is this extra steep driveway going to cause you a problem later when you're the seller? If so, let's make sure we buy it at a discount today to make up for the fact that it's going to give you trouble later. We can't change a steep driveway. We just have to take a lower price because of it. Well, let's go ahead and pay a lower price to get it if you like everything else about the house. Or the high tension power lines, or the navigating through the repairs and the inspections that are done. And how do I know who to hire? That buyer might say, well, home inspector, I don't know any home inspectors. Well, that's what I'm here for. I know lots of them. I'll give you the top ones that I've had the best success with, the ones that my clients seem to like the most. And I'm not going to recommend them to you, buyer client, because they pay me money under the table. I'm going to recommend them to you because they've proven themselves and I've watched them do good work, which is the reason that I recommend everybody to you, anybody. When that inspection happens and they show that they reveal that they need to have some work done, some repairs, and maybe the seller's not willing to pay for those repairs, you might still be willing to buy the house. But you're going to want to know, how much is it going to cost to fix it? I can meet the person out there to get the estimate for you. I can help you find some good repair people, good repair companies to give you those estimates. There's a lot of value in a buyer agent, more than just letting people in houses. So a good buyer agent is always ready to explain why we have value. It's more than just getting the listing exposure, just more than just getting a list of homes to consider. Let's go for a break. We'll come back and do a little bit more review and get on back into chapter 7. I'll see you in 10.
we got to talk about
hearing me okay? Thank you. Thank you. All right. Let's do a couple more and then we'll get on into 7. That client, who's the client to you? If you're the broker, who's your client? What do you owe them? What are those duties that you owe to a client? There it is. Thank you. Those duties we mentioned a couple times already, all those old car acronym duties. And I believe the next question has them. There it is. That's what they are. And then how much obedience does a broker owe to the client? That's a weird question. What's the thing about the obedience that we owe to our client? By obedience, we have to follow their directions, follow their instructions. But do we have to follow anything and everything they tell us to do? Not everything, because they may not even know this. They might, but they may not even know that they've asked us to do something that's not legal. So we've got to educate them. And so what we owe them is the obeying of their lawful directives, not the unlawful ones. And then, which old car fiduciary duty is given up and not provided when a broker and firm are acting as a dual agent for both buyer and seller? Which one do you give up in dual agency? There we go. Back around full circle. There we go. Okay, let's talk some more. Where do we leave off here in this Chapter 7 discussion? Here we go. Okay, there we are. By the way, a transaction broker or a facilitator, that's a term that we don't use. That's not a type of agency that we do in North Carolina because it's not really even agency. It represents no one. With transaction brokerage, I think they do it in Florida, among other states, maybe, but not in North Carolina. We don't do that here. Neither party is represented. The broker involved is not representing anybody. They're just carrying out the transaction. They're facilitating the transaction, might be how you could remember it. So we always represent somebody the way we do it here in North Carolina. And so here's that first substantial contact piece of the puzzle. We need to explain to a potential client what their choices are in terms of how we can work for them, how we can represent them. And when do we need to explain this to them? The point at which M&M, right, money and motivation, the point at which they've started talking about their money, their ability to purchase, or what they need to sell it for, or their motivation, their need, not their want necessarily, not like I'd kind of like to be moved out by fall, but more like we've got to be out of here by October 13th. That's a first substantial contact category. That's an example. First substantial contact, a deadline for when they have to accomplish something. Well, this is also the deadline for when we need to talk to them about what their choices are in hiring us. They're about to give us confidential information, potentially. The money, what they can afford. They've talked to a lender in the pre-approval letter for $375,000. Well, hopefully you will have talked to them about your role in this and how if you were pre-approved for $375, by the way, hopefully you've already told them I represent the seller. Don't tell me something like that before we've decided how we're going to keep moving forward or not. You want to hire me as a buyer agent? Great. Then tell me what you can afford. Then tell me the pre-approval letter. Maybe you haven't talked to a lender yet. I'll give you a recommendation or 3, and let's find out what your buying power is. So when you're about to hear their confidential information about their money ability, their motivation, or their wants and needs in a house, even just that, any of those things that could turn into you finding out information that could harm them if the other party to the transaction knew it, you need to talk about this concept. Give them informed consent, or have them give you informed consent about what way they want you to take care of them. We're going to look at the actual disclosure in a moment. It's just a 1-page document. And it's all about this first substantial contact. But remember, that is typically you talking to a prospective buyer or seller. You've got to talk to them about this working with a real estate agent's disclosure at first substantial contact. Money, motivation, wants and needs in a house. And you're just you're showing them, hey, here is what I could do for you. What do you want me to do? Do you want to hire me? If you don't want to hire me yet, that's okay too. But just don't tell me your money, your motivation, because I'm going to have to report back to the other party. If you want to buy this house we're sitting in, this open house that I'm holding, you want to buy this listing, don't tell me that you can afford $480 if this listing is asking $400, because you can't. That might affect their negotiating. If the seller were to know that they could actually afford $480, but the seller's only asking for $400, then the buyer can't really act like that they can only afford the $400. The seller would know better, for instance. That's why that sort of item would be a bad idea for the other party to know. We've got to, let's look at the disclosure first, and then we'll come back and talk about the process. So if we're talking to a seller, here's what that disclosure looks like. Let me do this actually. I'm going to show it to you in real life. Actual whole full page. But it's a single page. At the top of the page, it just tells them, look, don't share any confidential information until we have decided how we want to work together. Here we go. Alrighty. So this is the actual full single page. It's done this way so that you can, it won't let me zoom now. Done this way so that you can print it 2-sided, one side for seller and one side for buyer, because it's a good idea to talk about this. If you're talking to a seller, it's a good idea to chat with them about the whole buyer agency thing too, because why are they selling? Maybe they're buying something, and maybe they just thought you could help them with the selling of their house. They didn't realize that you could also help them buy the next thing. So the first box here looks the same on both versions. There's a seller version as well as a buyer version. Let me pull up that too. We'll pull that up in a minute. The first box says this form is not a contract. This is not what hires me. So don't worry about it yet. I'm just letting you know, potential client, that I need you to sign this disclosure because the real estate commission at any time could come down and come to my firm and say, we need to see your files. And we want to make sure you're doing these things right so that you're protecting consumers properly. So this is purely for my records, my files, so that I can prove to the real estate commission that I explained to you what your choices were. This does not actually hire me. This just isn't for your information form. And so you need to know if an agent is representing you or not. brokers are required to review this form with you. And they might stop you there. They might say to you, well, I've talked to 3 other brokers this past week looking at houses, and nobody's ever mentioned this form before. And I hear that a lot because a lot of brokers do this wrong, or at least some brokers don't talk about this as when they should. So it's not uncommon that somebody will say, that last broker I talked to didn't even mention this. And it's kind of a easy sell. You can kind of say, well, I can just tell you what we're required to do, and I would hesitate to work with somebody that didn't do the things that you're supposed to do, right? We're required to review this form with you before you tell us anything that could be a confidential piece of information that the other party from you, in this case, you're a seller, before you, the seller, tells me anything that a buyer might want to know that you don't want them to know. Here's how this works for a seller. Here's how this is important. It could be the seller is interviewing you to list their house, but they're also interviewing three other brokers. In a market where we have so many brokers, they know a lot of us. They know people who know people, and so it's not uncommon to have to compete with other brokers to get the listing. So here's what you do. You talk about this when you're supposed to. Before they've shared confidential information, you say to them, look, take a look at this box. We've got to review this with first substantial contact before we ask for any confidential. In other words, Mr. Seller, don't tell me the lowest you might be willing to take for your house, because you might end up, if you were to hire one of those other 2 agents that you're going to interview, it may very well be that I bring the buyer for your house because that's what I do. I'm pretty busy. And I would love to work for you, but if you don't choose to hire me to list your house, I could end up working for the buyer that buys your house. And if you told me the lowest you would be willing to take, I would be obligated to share that with the buyer. So fair warning, since you're still deciding who you want to hire, don't tell any of us anything confidential yet, because any of us could turn into the other agent for the other party. And odds are the other brokers that they're interviewing never even mentioned this as a possibility. So you're going to score some ethics points for even bringing it up to begin with. You're going to score points for talking to them about this, which may not have been brought up, and then mentioning that possibility to them. And it's all blaming it on the real estate commission, right? It's not you that requires this form, it's them. And that's okay. Saying, hey, the commission exists to protect the consumer. So here's what they say that I have to do, because I want to make sure that I'm doing it properly for your benefit. I'm going to review this form with you. Here we are doing it, but I'm also going to give you a copy of it. I'm going to need you to sign it so I have proof that I have it in my file, that I explained to you how agency works, and then I'm going to give you a copy of it too for your own protection, because what this is all about is this one. Don't share anything confidential until you've hired someone. Then you can share confidential with that person, as long as they're acting on your behalf, but not until then. Otherwise, they can and should and are required to share that with their client. And if their client happens to be the one buying your house, that's a problem for you. So the box is the same on both the seller version and the buyer version that we'll see next. The next little bit of it, the middle section of this disclosure, is actually a lot similar too. This middle piece about dual agency and designated dual is the same on the buyer version and the seller version, but the seller's version has this first option. Note what it says right there. Hey, agent, you're the one that should check whatever applies below. The agent is the one who checks one or more of these boxes here. It's the agent who checks it, not the client. You don't give it to the client and say, which one of these do you want? No, you say, here are which of these things that I offer, because you may not want to offer dual agency, or your firm might not even let you. Or maybe they'll let you do dual agency, but not designated dual agency, or maybe the opposite. So these boxes are for you to check and tell the potential client which things you offer. Out of these 4, this one at the bottom is for a buyer agent is for a seller who's going to be unrepresented. So it doesn't even apply in this case. If you're on a listing appointment, that seller is thinking about hiring a broker. But this last box is for that situation where that seller is choosing to be their own broker, to be unrepresented by an official real estate agent. And we'll talk about that one in a minute. But this first one is about what you need when someone's going to hire you to list their house. So you're offering them seller's agency. You're offering them the chance to hire you to list their house. And so that's going to be done with a written listing agreement. Notice it says written, not verbal. There's no such thing as a verbal listing agreement. If you have a verbal listing agreement, you have no listing agreement, because you can't market a property without it being in writing. Can't market a property verbally. You've got to have a listing agreement in writing before you can start marketing it. And there it is. It says so before they begin to market. It says it right here. If you sign the listing agreement, then the firm and its agents would represent you. And then the buyer would be represented by anybody but them. Anybody else but them. Because this first box is not about dual agency. We're going to address that next. But if you check this box, you're just saying, look, you can hire me and my firm to list your property. We'll represent you. A buyer could be represented by themselves or another firm, and they're going to look out for that buyer, and I'm going to look out for you. Now, if you do allow or offer dual agency, and your firm allows you to, then you'll check this one. You'll say, hey, seller, potential client, there's this thing called dual agency. And we went into that in great detail an hour ago, so I won't belabor the point. But we have a buyer who wants to purchase your property, represented by my same firm. But the thing about dual agency is the loyalty would be divided. The word is right there. Which old car duty is given up? Loyalty. But the firm and its agents must treat you and the buyer fairly and equally and cannot help you gain an advantage over the other one. So this is gold. For helping somebody understand dual agency, this just does it pretty efficiently. And then if they realize, wow, no loyalty, that's not great. I don't like that. Well, is there another choice besides this dual agency nonsense? Well, yeah. If you want to do this one instead of that one, or possibly in addition to it, we could do a designated dual agency situation. If a buyer wants to buy your property and that buyer has no other agent already, then our firm can assign them their own designated agent. They can designate one agent to represent them and one for you. I'm the one for you because we're going to list your house tonight, but another agent within my firm would be representing the buyer. And then loyalty is restored. There it is. And then I literally would do this. I'd print this page out, have a master copy, and then just highlight some of these words and phrases to make sure you always remember to bring them out, point them out. And then down here, again, if you're on a listing appointment, this last one doesn't even need to be talked about because you're not doing this last one. This last one says this: if you're a buyer agent and you're going to talk to a for sale by owner seller, you need to let that seller know, look, you're probably going to love me because I'm so darn likable. And in the course of this transaction, my buyer, I'm going to be representing my buyer, looking out for their best interests. So as much as you might like me, as easy as we are to get along with, don't tell me anything confidential that you wouldn't want the buyer to know, because I'm obligated to share it with that buyer because you represent yourself. I don't represent you. I like to make it a joke. And when I'm talking to a for sale by owner, maybe on the phone, trying to get an idea if they're even willing to pay a buyer agent commission, they may not be willing to pay me. And if the FSBO won't pay me and my own buyer won't pay me, there's nothing for me to do in this transaction, right? So I'll say to them, well, first of all, Mr. For Sale by Owner, congratulations. Welcome to the real estate business. We're colleagues. You and I are both in the same industry now. In fact, you have more listings than most brokers do because you got this one that's your own house, right? Congratulations for that. So since we're colleagues, I just needed to ask you a couple of questions. I have a buyer who has some interest in your house. Could I come out and take a look, make sure that it's a good fit for them before they spend their time? Because that's why they've hired me, to help them find good candidate homes for them, good listings. And once you're out there face to face with them, you're going to bring this up. You're going to say, hey, seller, by the way, don't tell me anything. I know you wouldn't, because you're not foolish. Obviously, you're a smart person. So don't tell me anything confidential about your situation, because I would have to tell my buyer that. And here's where you check the box and say, if you could sign this form, this is a disclosure, just so that I have proof in my file that I've explained to you basically this morning, not to share things that are confidential. So this fourth box is just about something you need from it for sale by owner. They'll not be representing you. They have no loyalty to you. They're representing their buyer. Don't share things confidential. And then the last bit here just says, hey, if none of that makes any sense, seller, there's another document the broker can give you. It's a brochure, black and purple, and it says, the title of it is Questions and Answers About the Working with Real Estate Agents Disclosure. A multifold brochure. It's got typical questions and answers people have. And we're not required to provide it, but it's a suggestion and it's a resource. And smart, the more the better, to help them get understanding. Then finally, sign here, print here, put your name, your license number, your firm. And after you've explained this to them, what if they were to say, well, that's all well and good, but I'm not signing it. I just met you. I'm not signing a form when I just met somebody today. What would your response be if they won't sign the form? What do you do if they don't sign it? You need it for your file. If the real estate commission ever looked at your files, they'd want to see this thing in there. But if that person you just talked to won't sign it, again, this doesn't hire you. This just tells them, gives you proof that you had this conversation with them. You explain to them how agency works. So if they won't sign this thing, you sign it. You make a reference on it. You put a little note here on it and you say, hey, I explained it to this person by name, the name of this person, this seller in this case. They wouldn't sign it, and date it. So you just make a note that they wouldn't sign it and date it and put it in your file. If they're a seller and you're there for a listing appointment, they're probably going to sign it, because that's sort of what the whole point is. But again, typical test questions. Is this something that hires you? Is this a document you need to be hired? No, this is not a hiring document. It's just a disclosure. That's it. So now that you have something in your brain as to what this thing looks like, how do we use it? How do we use it? We deliver it to them, right? We bring it up. If it's in person and we're on a listing appointment, we're going to bring it with us and pull it out first thing. As soon as we start talking about things, before they tell us anything confidential, because we're working with a seller that wants to list their house. We want to review their options with them, which thing that you offer and which you don't. You might not offer dual agency, so this is a great time to talk about it. Determine which way they want you to work for them. And I would talk about that form, and then I'd say, so this is not the thing that actually hires me. And then I'd pull out the listing agreement and say, this is what hires me. And so please sign here, and might even want to do a hard close and just say, this is what hires me. So let's get started. Let's go ahead and get your house listed. Find those buyers. But that disclosure is all about our files. Buyer can refuse to sign. There it is. This is all the stuff we just saw on the actual form. Those are the options. It's looked a little different from when we did this screen capture. And then the buyer version is almost exactly the same. It just looks like this in that middle section. The buyer agency part is saying, look, the agent who gave you this form and their firm will represent you as your buyer's agent and be loyal to you. You could begin that process with what's called oral buyer agency, but that will only last as long as the point at which you want to write an offer. Oh, that's what I want. Nope, that's not it. Sorry. Trying to pull up that exact one. I want to show it. Nope, that's not it either. I'll find it at the break and bring it back out. But it's basically the same thing, but for the buyer side. Look, you want me to represent just you, be your hired person, your buyer agent? That's what this top one is about. The middle two are about dual and designated, just like what we saw on the seller. And then the last one is this one called unrepresented buyer. And that's when you're a listing agent and you're explaining this concept to a buyer who doesn't have their own agent yet. And they call you off of your yard sign or from an ad and they say, I want to see your listing. And you say, do you have an agent? And they say no. Then you check this box. It might be that you don't want to offer dual agency to them, but you are still willing to write up the offer for them. You could be the listing agent, represent just your seller, help this unrepresented buyer to put an offer together, fill out the form, provide the form, fill it out, sign here, I'll deliver it to the seller. You could do all of that and not be a dual agent. Did you hear me on that? You could be the only agent in the transaction and still not be a dual agent. That would just mean that you're the listing agent and the buyer is unrepresented. There's no other broker. It's not dual. It's not designated dual. And there are a lot of brokers who choose not to do dual agency because they had a ugly situation come up before, so they don't want to ever do that again. But they don't want to harm their seller by maybe sending away some buyer that expresses interest. It would be great situation to be a listing agent and a buyer calls you with no other broker and they say, just write the offer. I don't care about all that agency stuff. I'll represent myself. And you could do it. You could be a listing agent. You would just say, fair warning, don't tell me anything confidential, because I would have to tell the seller you're an unrepresented buyer, and that's what this item is about. So don't share anything confidential with me. So here's how you could work with a buyer. A broker could work with a buyer as a seller subagent. A broker could work with a buyer as that buyer's exclusive buyer agent. Or they could work with the buyer as some sort of a dual agent. 3 ways that a broker could work with a buyer. Now, the thing that's different about buyer agency compared to seller agency is this phase, this optional temporary period of time where you could give them all of your old car duties, but not in writing. They don't want to sign a buyer agency agreement, but they'll let you be a buyer agent for them, an oral buyer agent. Again, you owe them everything. They owe you nothing. You could show them 10 houses this morning. They could buy one of them this afternoon with a different agent, and there's nothing you can do about it because all you are is an oral buyer agent. It's a one-sided, open-end relationship, right? You're letting one of them date around, but you're committed to them, kind of. You're also probably working with other buyers too, but they get to work with anybody because it's not in writing. But you get to let them try you out, so to speak. Let them see if they like how you work. And you're just trying to earn their business, and hopefully sooner than later, they will go ahead and convert this oral buyer agency into a written buyer agency agreement. But that can't last forever. Oral buyer agency will never get you paid. It can only be done up to the point when they want to write an offer, when they want you to write an offer. That's when it has to be put into writing. The oral buyer agency agreement would have to be put into writing before you write the offer for them. But most importantly, all this agency stuff needs to be addressed, talked about, express, not implied, right? There's no implied agency. Well, there is, but it's illegal. Implied agency is not allowed. Must be expressed, must be intentional. We're going to recap some stuff. Let's see. The BIC is responsible for actions by all affiliates. A provisional's activities have to be in the name of that broker in charge. The BIC is responsible, right? And the provisional broker is to only be paid from their own broker in charge. When we work for a firm, we are independent contractors. We're not employees. We're not W-2 salaried employees. We're 1099 independent contractors, paid a gross commission. That means all the expenses have to be paid from it, including taxes, right? There's a written employment contract with the BIC. An independent contractor's agreement would be a better title for that. And our income is not a salary. It's based on the commission. The commission's earned. So while the most important 3 words in real estate for consumers would be location, 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 that old joke, the 3 most important words for a broker or a realtor are disclosure, disclosure, disclosure. That's how important this thing is. We've got to disclose our agency status, who we represent. We've got to disclose material facts about a property. We owe that to everybody. And so that brings us to Chapter 8. We'll talk about the documents that actually carry this stuff out. So the level 1 in Chapter 8 are the laws about solicitation of clients and customers. We can't steal other brokers' clients. And then we'll talk about employment contracts with licensees. Level 2 is the MLS and cooperation, antitrust laws. And then level 3 is earning of a fee, some requirements for contracts and listing and buyer agency agreements. So let's see some requirements for these agency contracts. Here's what an agency agreement has to have on it, according to Real Estate Commission rule. You don't need to know that it's Rule 104, but just know that it is a commission rule. They would test you on that. They'll say, is it a commission rule that all agency agreements must have a non-discrimination provision? Yes, it is. Or they might say, which of the following is not required by the Real Estate Commission to be on an agency agreement? And they'll have 3 of these items here, plus 1 that is not on this list, right? So that you have one that you could pick, because they're asking you for the one that's not required to be on an agency agreement. So what does an agency agreement have to have on it? Let's think of, first of all, remember, what is an agency agreement to begin with? A listing agreement between you and a seller, or your firm and a seller. A buyer agency agreement between your firm and a seller. A property management agreement, a tenant representation agreement, that sort of thing. Agency. They need to be signed by all parties. Who are the parties in an agency agreement? Who are these parties we speak of? Yeah, seller and who else? Seller or buyer would be one of the parties, or renter or owner, landlord. And then the other party in this agency agreement is the firm. You got it, the firm. But you are the broker within that firm who is signing on the firm's behalf. So signed by all parties. If it's a listing agreement, the seller's going to sign it, and you're going to sign it on behalf of your firm. Also need to have your listing, your license number. Your license number, you, the human broker. Frankly, there's also, just so happens that there's a place for the firm's license number, and we do put it on there, but the testable information here is that the listing, or the broker, the human broker themselves, their license number has to be on this agency agreement. Got to have an expiration or a termination date. These agency agreements can't last forever. You can't have someone beholden to you to always list every house they've ever owned from here forward. It's only good for this particular duration of time, for the selling of this house, or for helping this buyer for this amount of time. How long maybe? How long might a listing agreement or a buyer agency agreement be? It's negotiable, totally negotiable. How long do you think it's going to take you to complete the job? I go for the longest I can get. I frequently will put a year. But a lot of agents will talk about 3 or 6 months or 9 months. Whatever the person will agree to, whatever you'll agree to. It also depends on how long it takes houses to sell, right? If it's a listing agreement we're talking about and houses are taking like 200 days to sell, that's not now. That's been other markets in the past, and I'm sure it'll be that way again at some point in the future when it's a buyer's market, right? And sellers are kind of desperate because there's more there's more listings than there are buyers. In that event, the days on the market that it takes for something to sell is going to go much bigger. Now it's in the double digits, right? Sometimes single digits still, single and low double digits, 7, 8, 10 days on the market before it goes under contract. Maybe 20 or 30 if you price it too high or some other problem. But in those times, the opposite of this market we're in, when it's a buyer's market, I remember when days on market were like 120 days, 150. Am I going to list a house in that situation for 30 days? It's not too fair. It's not really fair to me. So I'd probably, if a seller insisted on only a 30 or 60-day listing agreement, and I know it's probably tends to take double that to get them sold, I might politely excuse myself. Or I might be up to the challenge and I might say, well, let's see what we can do. But just know that they're giving you 60 days, tends to take 120 days. Do you really want to put your time and money and marketing efforts in it when they might kind of cut your legs out from under you and say, well, it's a 60-day agreement. You didn't get it done. Sorry. We're going to try someone else. Business decision. Talk to your BIC. See what they advise you to do. But it's got to end. There's got to be an expiration date. And then, of course, all agency agreements are about working with people. Therefore, we need to make sure everybody knows we don't care what group those people are in, right? The federal fair housing protected classes, non-discrimination provisions, letting people know we're not going to give preferential or no treatment to certain groups based on their protected classes. And it's in all caps. We'll see it firsthand as we look through these different agency agreements. So it's got to be in writing. It's got to be in writing, and the parties sign it. Got to have the broker's license number, got to have an expiration date, and got to have that fair housing language. What would be the point of a listing agreement between you and a seller? Who benefits? Really? And it's okay in this business if it's the agent, if it's the broker. But who wants it the most? Who wants a listing agreement the most? The seller or the broker? I mean, wouldn't a seller be just as happy if you would market their property and they didn't have to sign anything? Yeah, if they could find that, if that was allowed, sure. Free. Or maybe not free, but they're not obligated. They don't have to sign something. Well, they do have to sign something. It is required. But the point of this question is that a listing agreement exists for the firm, right? For the broker, for the firm. It's an employment contract. It's so the firm has some sort of assurance that their efforts, their time, and their money spent, well, I should say the broker, because that's who's actually spending the time and money, is not just going to be a waste. You at least have somebody, a seller, saying, yep, I'm going to hire you, and if you bring a ready, willing, and able buyer and we end up closing successfully, or maybe even if we don't close successfully, but you just brought the ready, willing, and able buyer, you would be due your commission. It's for the benefit of the firm and the broker, right? And it's to identify that you're going to be marketing their property and trying to find buyers for them. So what you're here for, the point of you guys being in this room with me right now in this Zoom environment, is because you want a real estate license. And the entity in charge of giving out real estate licenses is the Real Estate Commission. But once you get that license, if you need access to the MLS, and you do, because you kind of need to have access to the multiple listing service to really do anything in this business, usually it's sort of an intertwined, related need. and requirement to also become a realtor, to belong to the trade association called the Realtor Association. Realtor. So if you're a realtor, then you have a real estate license. You didn't become a realtor because you had the license. That's not what made you a realtor. But you can't become a realtor unless you do have a license. It just means that you've contacted this realtor association and said, I want to pay you money so that I can put this blue R behind my name, so that I can prove to the world that I'm willing to hold myself to a higher standard, to adhere to this thing called a code of ethics. There is a realtor code of ethics. When you subscribe to the Realtor Association, you actually are, it's like a 3-in-1 thing. You belong to the local board of realtors, you belong to the state of North Carolina board of realtors, and you belong to the National Association of Realtors. And we just in January had to pay our annual dues, and I believe it's like 150 goes toward the federal, another 150 to the state, and like 200 to the local, or something that adds up to about $600 or $700 total. But all of that, many firms won't hire you unless you are a member, a realtor member. You got to become a realtor in order to belong, in order to work for that firm. Because if the firm has a realtor license, every broker within them has to be a realtor too. So there's little things there, but what it all comes around to is being a realtor means that we're going to behave better than if we weren't. We have to. To hang this R behind our name, we have to follow the code of ethics. And it says more than just protect the consumer, although that's part of it. It also says don't be a jerk to your fellow realtors and fellow brokers. Let's work well together. Let's work together on things. Let's not steal clients from each other. Let's elevate the status of this industry. Don't let it be like a cutthroat kind of industry, so that if somebody has a listing, maybe your neighbor 2 doors down knows that you just got your real estate license, but then tomorrow you find out and you see a yard sign pop up and it's not yours. They dared to list their house with someone else. And you go to barbecues with them. You grill out with them like once a month. They're your buddy, but they listed with someone else and they knew better. They knew you had your license. And so you go marching over there to their house, knock on the door, and you say, I told you I got my license last week. What did you list with them for? You fire them right now so you can hire me. I'm going to give you a chance. I'm sure you just forgot in the moment, but here's your chance to keep our friendship. You need to fire that guy whose sign is in your yard and then hire me instead. That would be against the Realtor Code of Ethics. You would have just interfered with another broker's client. You can't go after them. Tortuous interference with contractual relations is the boring legal term. You can't pursue other people's clients. You're going to be a new agent, new broker. You become a realtor, and you're going to be thinking, how can I generate business? How can I get people to list their houses for and buyers to work for? And if it were legal, if it were allowable, one great way to know if somebody wants to sell their home is to see all those people that have homes for sale and just go down the street and call owners of people with for sale signs and say, fire them and hire me. But obviously that's exactly what we're saying here that you can't do. So yeah, can't steal other people's clients. It's against the Code of Ethics, Article 16. And it happens with just conversation. Sometimes brokers that aren't tuned into this like they should be, maybe they're talking to another parent at a ball game or in the grocery store line or whatever. And I heard this on a TV show, on a reality show. Anybody ever heard of the Chrisleys? The Chrisley show? And you just saw they went to prison for tax evasion or whatever. I was watching that show a couple of years ago, and she used to have a real estate license, the wife. And I watched the show, and the daughter had just like turned 20 and wanted to go out on her own. I believe the daughter had already bought a townhouse and wanted to upgrade to another one or something. The daughter listed her house with a broker, and the mom was in the process of getting her license back active again. And the mom on the show called the daughter and said, I'm getting my license reactivated. You need to go ahead and fire that agent and get ready because I'll be ready to list your house next month when I get this license back. I'm assuming she wasn't a realtor in that moment, but still, that would have probably been a problem. I was kind of wondering if anybody ever called her out on it. She's got more problems now, obviously, but that's exactly the kind of thing we're talking about. So can't do it, can't steal clients. Here's the other thing: the do not call list, the do not call registry. Anybody got a call this week from a business and you're like, I thought I was on the list. Why do people keep calling me? Well, there's a thing. That is a thing. The do not call registry. You put your phone number on there so businesses don't bug you, and that includes brokers. And so here are the rules about the do not call registry that we as brokers have to follow. We can't solicit business from people on the do not call registry. In these situations, there are some exemptions. Here's when you're allowed to. So read this slide this way. I can call people on the do not call list if fill in the blank. So you can call somebody who's on the do not call registry for 18 months following the last purchase you had with them. If they were a past customer, you sold them a house, for instance, you can keep calling them for 18 months after that last purchase. Now, keep in mind, these do not call registry exemptions exist to any business or apply to any business. But in real estate, when you're working with somebody, you develop a personal relationship. And there is also an exemption for that too. So the do not call registry does not apply to personal relationships. So usually when you have a closing and everybody's happy and they like you, and you could call them 2, 3, 4 years later and they're not going to be mad about it, even if they're on the do not call registry and you haven't done anything wrong because you have a personal relationship with them. But for our purposes here of this pre-licensing course and the exam, the do not call registry exemptions include you're allowed to call people on the list for up to 18 months following a purchase. You're also allowed to call people on the list for 3 months from when they make an inquiry. For instance, maybe they fill out a form on your website to get more information on a listing. You can keep calling that person for 3 months from when they made the inquiry. So 18 months and 3 months, know the difference. And then the for sale by owner. If that for sale by owner, I see it's almost time for a break. Let me finish this slide and we'll go for our break. If that for sale by owner seller is on the do not call registry, you are allowed to call them, but in what circumstance? What's a good excuse, a valid excuse to call a seller on a for sale by owner on the do not call registry? When can you call? When can you actually call them? Tony nailed it. Only if you have an actual potential buyer. But you can probably guess that many brokers, let's just say some, there are brokers who really want to call that for sale by owner to talk them into going ahead and listing their property. They don't have a buyer. They just want to surprise attack that FSBO with a listing appointment. Hey, I want to come out and see if your house appeals to any of my buyers. And once they get out there, they'll start telling them how stupid they are for trying to sell it on their own and that they should just hire them. That's exactly what's not allowed, right? If that for sale by owner is on the do not call registry, you better only call them if you really have a potential buyer, not an imaginary one. And then you, of course, can't solicit listings of other firms in general. What if somebody who's got their property listed with another firm, what if they call you? Forget about the do not call registry. They call you and they say, you know what? This agent hasn't really gotten it done. Our listing with them expires next week. We'd like to go ahead and have a new one in place. Can you come talk to us about what you do to get properties sold? Are you allowed to talk to them? Are you allowed to go to their house before that listing expires? You actually are allowed to go before the listing expires. In fact, on the listing agreement, it says Is this property is currently listed for sale by so and so firm, but upon it expiring, this listing is going to kick in. So you're actually allowed to talk to them, but not because you went to them. You can't be proactive here. You can't be the instigator. It would only be if they came to you, called you, maybe because somebody recommended you, and they said, "Hey, I'm listed currently, but I want to give you a shot. This expires next week." What if it doesn't expire for 3 more months and they want to list with you instead of who they're with? Remember, listing agreements, agency agreements are not unilateral, they're bilateral. Just because that seller is frustrated with their listing agent doesn't mean they can fire that firm on the spot. They would have to ask the firm to let them out of the listing agreement. So if they called you and said, "I want to fire them and hire you," you're going to have to explain that to them. "Hey guys, I would love to help you. I'd love to list your house, but when does your current listing expire?" "Oh, for 3 more months." You can't just fire them. You're going to have to call them up and tell them what you want to do. If that's what you want to, and all of this while you're not encouraging them to do it, right? You don't want to talk poorly about their current, just stay out of it. Say, if this is what you want to do, you're going to have to fire your firm, or not fire them. You're going to have to ask them to let you out of the listing agreement before you could do anything differently. But again, if they come to you, you could go ahead and sign a listing agreement with them that's going to be effective as of the expiration of what they're in now with whoever they're listed now. Okay. When we come back from break, we'll talk about the do not call list as it relates to mailing things. See you in 10. Okay. So the do not call list, the do not call registry is all about what? Phone calls. So how can you contact potential clients besides the phone? There is no do not mail list. You can certainly mail things. In fact, the exact same government that wrote the do not call laws would love for you to pay money to the post office to send a bunch of cards out. And a lot of brokers do. They will send cards out, postcards in people's, like maybe it's a neighborhood they want to, what's called farming, sort of become the go-to agent within that neighborhood by just inundating them with mailing material, and that's allowed with really no limitations. You can't solicit other people's listings even by mail, though. And so frequently, if you get those cards in the mail, you'll see it in the fine print. They'll say, this was not intended to, if your house is currently listed for sale by a broker, this is not intended to solicit that listing. So they'll put that in there, but you can mail. You can mail all you want to. You can also door knock. Door knocking is fine. Sometimes you might see a sign that says no solicitors, and you've got to make a judgment call. Use your best judgment. Talk to your BIC. And some people still knock, but you kind of want to, again, make sure the reputation is elevated. Don't do something that's going to tick people off. For the purposes of this class, knocking is allowed, mailing is allowed, also emailing is allowed. But what do you think you need to include? If you're going to mass email to someone, MailChimp, Constant Contact, any of those types of places, you can send out thousands of emails at one time. What would you need to include in your email as a requirement? You can certainly send them out, but you got to include this. If you're a subscriber to any sort of email newsletters from various companies, and you scroll down to the bottom and read the fine print, there's one little word down there. It says unsubscribe. You got to give them an opt-out. Got to give them the ability to opt out of receiving your emails. Same for faxes, but nobody does that anymore. Got to provide an unsubscribe or an opt-out option when you send out emails. Okay. This rule is about when can we compensate out-of-state brokers. So imagine this scenario. We've got a broker from any other state. Let's just say Virginia. And that broker calls you up and says, hey, I've done my research. I've seen that you seem to have your act together. I like what I see on your website, on your social media. And so my grandmother is relocating down there to your market in North Carolina. And would you pay me a referral fee if I refer her to you? I think you do a great job in taking good care of her. Would you pay me a fee to refer my grandmother to you? And you would say, of course I would. I'd be glad to. And you'll negotiate, figure out that fee. But that's not the point. The next point is this. They'll continue the conversation and they'll say, well, perfect, great, looking forward to it. I'm going to drive her down there on Saturday if you're available. And then you can show my grandmother the houses that you've picked, that she has picked, that you've talked to her about between now and then. And I'll be along for the ride. And, I'm a broker here in Virginia, so she'll be glad to get my opinion as well as yours. Do we have a problem? Yes, you have a problem. You have to explain to that Virginia broker that the only way that you can pay them a referral fee for grandma is if they stay home. They can't come along. Because here's the reason the commission won't allow it. Real Estate Commission says, what are the chances that a licensed broker in another state comes here with the person that they recommend and can keep their mouth shut and not give real estate advice? Because if they give real estate advice in North Carolina about a North Carolina real estate deal, they've just practiced real estate in North Carolina without a license. Doesn't matter that they have a license wherever they came from. We can't let people do real estate without a license in North Carolina. They don't have a North Carolina license. That's why they're referring the person to you. But if they want to come along for the ride, not allowed. That's what the rule says. If they have an active license and you're going to pay them a referral fee, they've got to stay put. They can't come along, because by coming along, they're probably going to engage in brokerage activity in North Carolina, which is illegal if they don't have a North Carolina license. Can't look at houses along with you, can't take you along. And I say grandma because what's the more, it's like, oh gosh, can't they help the grandma? What if she can't drive? Well, they can come. They can certainly bring her here. They can come here. They can look at houses as long as you don't have to pay them a referral fee. You see the catch? If they want that referral fee, they've got to stay home. If they're willing to not get the referral fee, then they can come bring grandma, then they can come along. But it's all about, can't pay you a referral fee if you are going to end up practicing real estate without a license in North Carolina. They can't help themselves. Now, if they stay put in Virginia, send grandma here, and you take her around, at the end of the day, she goes back to her hotel room and she calls them and says, well, we saw these 5, and what do you think about them? You can't help that. You can't do anything to prevent that or anything about that, and you don't hopefully know anything about that. But you need to let them know this rule so that you don't become a party to this thing happening, this illegal doing real estate without a license, giving advice without a license in North Carolina. So we can't compensate out-of-state brokers if they engage in brokerage activity here. Okay, Sherman antitrust. There's a couple of things that could come up on the test about Sherman antitrust laws. Sherman antitrust laws, again, it's to protect the consumer. And so this applies in several ways. First of all, Sherman antitrust laws exist to keep firms from creating monopolies. You know what a monopoly means? One business gets all the business, sort of like the phone company. It's sort of like, well, how is that not a monopoly? Everybody uses the same phone company. We won't go there. But it would be like this. Let's say 3 big firms in Charlotte get together and they say, you know what? We do most of the business out here, so out of respect for each of us 3 main big firms, we're going to let Firm A take care of all the northeast side of Charlotte business. Firm B is going to take care of all the west side of Charlotte business, and Firm C is going to take care of all the southeast side of Charlotte business. And none of us are going to go into each other's territory. Firm B will stay out of Firm A's territory and vice versa. Well, that limits that harms the consumer, because it's not giving the consumer the ability to shop around, right? They don't get to consider all firms, just the ones that are claiming that territory in their part of town. So that would be a monopoly. That's what we're talking about here. Sherman antitrust laws can't limit competition by assigning areas. Federal Trade Commission enforces the Sherman antitrust laws. It also is the thing that says we can't say there's a standard commission. Has anybody heard that? Anybody heard some reference on Facebook or social media or out there in the world? Somebody says, what's the real estate commissions these days? How much do people charge to list a house? I still hear it. I still see it. I was watching a real estate coach the other day, a YouTube coach guy talking about real estate, and on the video just the other day, he kind of gave some conflicting information. In one breath, he said, well, all commissions are negotiable, which is the way we're supposed to say it, the way it's the truth. But then he just couldn't help himself. About 2 minutes into the video, he said, well, my whole career commissions have kind of hovered around 5 or 6%. That's kind of the standard. I'm like, oh no, you were doing so good, but then you screwed it up. Somebody could turn him in for that, right? That's a violation of Sherman antitrust. He said there's a standard commission. There is not. You can't imply or tell the consumer that here's what we charge. There's no avoiding it, right? Can't set fees. The industry can't say this is what we're going to charge as an industry. All firms are going to charge no lower than X percent. And that applies to the Realtor Association, the MLS, a group of firms getting together, like maybe the 10 top biggest firms can't get together and say, okay, let's all decide that we're not going to go lower than 5, no lower than 5%. Or even a group of individual brokers can't do it. If the topic of commission rates comes up, how much do you charge is okay, by the way. You could answer that question with a number. If a person out in the wild or a listing appointment seller or a buyer client says, well, how much do you charge for commission? You could tell them, I charge 6%. I charge 3% to help a buyer, because that is your choice. You could also say, my firm charges 5% to list property, if that's what your firm allows you to say. That's allowable, but you can't say this entire group charges a standard of such and such. That's not allowed. Your answer would be this. What's the standard commission? There's no such thing. Commission is negotiable. A firm could choose what they charge, but not all firms could get together and say this is our minimum. All commissions are negotiable. Sometimes in that case, when they're asking you this question, they're asking you that so they know if they want to proceed with you or not. Because maybe they want to weed you out based on your answer to this question. And so here's a scenario that comes up. They call you on the phone and they say, you know, I saw your sign, saw you listed the house down the street, or I heard about you, or somebody recommended you. Just curious, I'm thinking about selling my house. What do you charge for commission? If this is on a phone call or an email or a text, there's no way I'm ever answering that question with anything other than, it depends. I haven't seen your house yet. Because it does. I don't know what I'm getting myself into. Why would I give them a quote on a commission rate, even if I always charge X percent? Until I've seen their house, I don't know how hard it might be to sell it. I don't know what their expectations are on the price. They might have a price in mind that's going to take forever to get a buyer for. They might have a price in mind that's more like next year's price. They want to list it today, but they're asking a price that is not worth today. Based on my research, I find out, that's overpriced. Do I want to even list it at all? But at the very least, let's go look at it in person and see what kind of condition it's in, how it's going to be shown, get a feel for, are they really going to do what it takes to get it sold in a reasonable time frame for the most money? They might live in their house in a messy way. And that's okay. I don't care how someone lives in their house, but when you hire me to give my time and effort and money toward getting your house sold, now I care. Now it is my business, because it's literally my business. Now I've got to have a conversation. Look, let's turn your house into from the place you live into an asset to convert to the most possible cash. And by doing that, we need to box up all of these collectibles and put them in the garage. We need to clean it. We need to figure out the dog situation. And you go through the whole list. We need to get rid of some stuff, maybe move some of these couches out that you don't use, right? There's a stack of newspapers by the door, all that fun stuff. And if they're resistant to those things affect how quickly it will sell and for how much it could sell. So you may have to say no. And maybe they say, well, you charge 6%. Well, the last broker I talked to last week only charges 5%. And now you have a decision to make. Do you want to have a race to the bottom? Maybe you do. Maybe you could think of a way to beat their price. Okay, I'll do it for 5%, but you said you were going to buy something too. If you use me and let me help you buy the next house in addition to selling this house, then yes, I will meet or maybe even beat that other broker's commission. That would be fine. It's your choice, along with your BIC. Make sure your firm allows you to negotiate. They may not let you. Sometimes the firm has a policy and says, look, we're a full service broker. Here's what we charge, and we don't allow you to negotiate that down. We don't want to be seen as a firm that races to the bottom. So sometimes you got to be willing and able to walk away. You also cannot do this under the Sherman antitrust laws. You can't boycott, and all that means is getting together and saying you're not going to use another entity. You're going to either not show another firm's listing just because they're listed with that other rival firm, or you're going to get together and say, well, this home inspector ticked me off, so let's all get together and never use them again. You can't agree to not use a service provider or show other people's listings. That comes up, it comes up on social media a lot. Sometimes realtors chime in on social media posts talking about trashing other firms or other entities. You have to be just real careful. Don't just join in the fun. Got to make sure that you're not violating Sherman antitrust laws, doing something that looks like you're crossing this line. And then here's the one about market allocation, dividing up a market. Realty firm A will do this side of town. Realty firm D will do this other side of town. And we won't enter into each other's territory. We'll basically be forcing all those residents in that side of town to only have that choice of them, not us. And in exchange, we're going to be uncontested on this side too. These Sherman antitrust violations, all these 3 or 4 that we just talked about, it's a big deal. $100,000 fine for an individual broker who violates it. $1 million for like a corporation. Could also involve up to 3 years in prison for violating Sherman antitrust laws. How egregious was a broker in violating it, or a firm? It's going to depend on the money and the time, right? So it's a big deal. What's it take to earn the fee? Let's talk about compensation, commission, earning commission. First of all, what you're earning is agreed upon and nailed down in the listing agreement. What that seller is willing to pay the brokers is listed in the listing agreement. That's where we put it. We don't put it in the contract, not allowed, but we put it in the listing agreement between the seller and the listing firm. And then that listing firm puts it out to the MLS, the multiple listing service, and says, this is how much we're going to give to a buyer agent or to a sub agent. So the testable thing here is, would a sales contract have the commission mentioned in it? No, not allowed. Can't put the agent's commission in the contract. The commission is handled in the agency agreements, like a listing agreement or a buyer agency agreement. What does it take to earn a commission again? Got to have an active real estate license and a valid written listing contract. There's no oral listing agreement. And then also remember, when have you earned the commission? That's different than when you actually get it in your hands. You've earned it probably several days or maybe even weeks before the closing day. Closing day is when you'll finally get the check. But the check you get from the closing attorney on the closing day is not made out to you. It's made out to your firm. And you will take it over to your firm, turn it in with the rest of your final paperwork, and say, hey, office manager or broker in charge or whoever does it, please give me my piece of the pie. Here's the total check to our firm. Now give me my split. That's when you get a check with your name on it. But that's when you received it. You earned it back whenever that point in time was that you produced a ready, willing, and able buyer. So if the deal were to not quite make it to closing and fall apart, somebody breached, and you decided to pursue, and your firm decided to pursue the commission from the seller who maybe breached on the whole thing, just decided not to sell. 2 days before closing, seller, everything's done. The buyer loan got approved, the repairs were negotiated, everything's finished. but the seller decides they don't want to sell. They can't bear to sell it 3 days before closing and the whole deal falls apart. Well, your firm might get sued by the buyer agency firm. They might say, hey, you owe us a buyer agent commission. Your firm's like, well, I'm not paying you that. I don't even have it. They screwed us too. And so your firm might sue the seller to get paid the commission because everybody did what they were supposed to do. A ready, willing, and able buyer was procured. You just haven't been paid yet. And there's not going to be a closing because they breached. They walked away, backed out. It's pretty tough for a seller to breach. I mean, sellers can't just change their mind. Buyers can change their mind all the way up to closing. It's just that they're going to lose a certain amount of money if they change their mind. It just depends on how much money are they willing to walk away from based on when they choose in the process to back out. But that's the buyer's privilege. The seller better be pretty serious about selling before they sign the contract, before they sign the offer to make it into a contract, which is what we'll learn in chapters 9 and 10 next. So it's tough for a seller. There's really not much wiggle room for a seller to get out of a contract. But if they do, if they just walk away and decide to breach, they are subject to being sued for the commission. If a firm wants to do it, firm might say, you know what, I don't want to hire an attorney. I don't want to go through the time and the trouble and paying an attorney to maybe win, maybe even if I think I'll win. I don't want the reputation in the industry, in the market, people to say, well, this firm sues its clients, even if it's justified. It's a business decision, but it's not yours. It's your firm's decision, right? Because it's your firm's listing agreement. So there it is. That's when we've actually earned it. Ready, willing, and able buyer has been procured. That ready and willing is pretty easy to prove because they came along with an offer, got accepted, and now we're under contract. That's pretty clear. But are they able? Well, if they're paying cash, they're able right off the bat because prove that they have the cash. Okay, then they're able. So if you had to go to court and sue somebody, the judge would say, were they ready, willing, and able? Cash buyer? Okay, good. Looks like you've earned it. And so then you would have won. Your firm would have won, and that seller has to pay. But the able part, if it's a buyer getting a loan, would be harder to prove. Where in the process was the loan approved? Did the seller decide to breach before the final loan approval got determined? Then the able part maybe has not been fulfilled, and then could be that the commission is not determined to have been earned. So we get paid after we've earned it, probably by days or weeks, because we don't get paid till the deed is recorded. And everybody's gotten their money. The seller got their proceeds, the buyer got the keys, and then the firms finally get their checks. Here's how a transaction could fall through, but you could still be entitled to your commission. If one of the spouses refuses to sign the final closing documents, for instance, then you're still entitled to the commission. If there's a defect in the title, if the seller can't deliver possession, and so breaches because of it, it would be a breach. If the seller comes up with terms that were not in the original listing contract, they say, well, now I want to add this in. Well, good for you, but we never agreed to that. You still you have earned and are entitled to your commission. They're trying to pull things from air, right? Or if the seller and buyer cancel the sales contract, depends. Again, ready, willing, and able, then yeah, earned and entitled to the commission. If the buyer breaches the sales contract, ready, willing, and able buyer, potentially you would have earned and are entitled to the commission. Then we get this phrase. If a broker is the originator of a series of events, for instance, a buyer buying, and maintains that series of events without a break in continuity, and it has resulted in procuring a ready, willing, and able buyer, then they are what is called a procuring cause of sale. This comes up sometimes when there's disputes between brokers over who should get the commission. Did I tell you that story of me and the other broker in my same firm? Can't remember if I've told that to you. Okay, it was the post class. In my second or third year, I was at a big firm, big independent firm, and they had multiple locations. I was in the university location. There was also a South Park location in Charlotte. And I was working with a buddy of mine, a single guy, and both of us were single at the time, and that's relevant here in a minute. Um, so he was working with me and obligated to me and happy to work with me. And he was looking around on a Saturday without me. We weren't supposed to look at property that day, but he just popped into a new construction townhome community in the Northeast University side of Charlotte. And he saw this attractive, single looking female and started talking to her as you do. And she was notably ticked off, angry. Turns out she had been working with a real estate broker, and he had brought her up, met her in South Park, drove her up 40 minutes north to look at property, but he forgot his lockbox key. And that's annoying and inconvenient, but it's not like the guy's terrible for that. It's a mistake, and mistakes happen. But she wasn't mad at him for that. She was annoyed because he basically didn't drive her back to South Park. He said, "You just want to look around in this new construction community, and I'll drive back and grab my key and then come back up." It was because he had also been condescending to her. It had all sort of come to a head based from that situation. He had kind of talked down to her. In fact, he had never even asked her to sign anything. He had never talked to her about agency, the working with agents disclosure, didn't have a buyer agency agreement with her. He had shown her a handful of houses, and she was just kind of unhappy. And then my friend struck up the conversation. He got the whole scoop. She told him all that stuff, and he said, "Well, you should call Neil. He won't forget his lockbox key." Ha ha ha, whatever. But she did. She called me, and explained the whole thing to me. And I'm like, "Okay, well, did you sign a buyer agency agreement with them?" And she said, "No, I don't even know what that is. He doesn't talk to me about any of that. He's shown me some houses, and that's it." Come to find out, he worked for the same firm that I did, just at the other location. And so it sounded to me like there's nothing obligating her to him, nothing in writing. Not even, she claims, oral buyer agency, which still doesn't matter because she would have the freedom to move on to whomever if he were an oral buyer agent even. So I asked my manager, "Can I work with this person?" And she said to me, "By the way, Neil, go ahead and ask your manager, but just to let you know, I've already decided if you can't help me, you're the last chance your firm has. I won't use your firm. I'll go down the street and get another firm to help me from here forward. I'm only giving you a shot because I liked your friend. He seems like a good guy, and it seems like he's pretty intelligent, and he recommended you." So it was kind of our last shot. I talked to my manager. She said, "Sure, long as she tells him she doesn't want to work with him, he should have had all that stuff signed. He didn't. And so even if it's in our same firm, you go ahead and work with him. He should have done better." And so we did. But I didn't just swoop in there and write a contract on something he showed her. I started from scratch, connected her with different lenders, showed her everything all around the city for the following month. Looked at South Park, what's it called? I just forgot it. Several neighborhoods all around, up in my neck of the woods, down south, off to the east and west. Her mom came along a couple of times. So I showed her a good dozen or so. Of course, we re-looked at some that he had shown her. And one of those is what she decided to buy. As, Murphy's Law, luck would have it. That's what she wanted to buy, was one of the ones that just so happened was what he showed her. But again, nothing in writing, no buyer agency. And so we bought it. She bought it. And 3 days after the closing, my manager called me in her office, and said, "The manager from South Park called me and said that agent down there says that he is the procuring cause of sale, and therefore he should get the entire commission." Anybody having any feelings on my behalf right now? And I'm like, "Well, that's interesting. What do you say?" And she said, "It's up to you. Obviously, you shouldn't have to give him your entire commission, but what do you want to respond?" And I'm like, "Well, that's a easy no." And so she called me later and said, "Okay, well, he's proposing that you split it 50-50." And I'm like, "You know what? Still no. Thank you, Libby. I appreciate the expression. That's exactly what I was thinking in my head was whatever you just showed on your face. I'm like, no. And then it started to get interesting. My manager said after the third or fourth attempt, she said, Neil, sometimes in this business, we just need to put things behind us and move forward and just be done with the mess. And, maybe it'd be okay to give them a couple bucks and just move forward. And I'm thinking, this sounds like you want to be done with this, but none of this is your money that is involved. And I'm like, no, still not interested. But eventually she wore me down. My own manager trying to put this to rest. And I said, okay, fine, whatever. I'll give him a 20% referral fee. And he said, no, I'll take 40. And I said, okay, 25, still very begrudgingly because my manager's pushing me. He's like, no, 35. And it went like that. And then finally I said, I think I stopped at 25. And I said, you know what? I'm done. I tried. And they agreed. They said, if you both agree, let's take it to arbitration and just let the three managers that neither of you know from other offices in our firm decide. And I'm like, I feel like I have this in pretty much in my favor. I have it in writing. I have the working with agents disclosure done properly. I had the buyer agency agreement. I have even a letter I got her to write saying if I had not used Neil, I wasn't going to use your firm at all. That guy screwed it up and I wasn't interested in working with him. So it was Neil or nothing. And I even wrote up some math, a little worksheet that showed what I had earned and how even having to go through this silly arbitration was more than I should have to deal with. And I ended up winning all of it. They didn't give him anything. I got all of it. Got to keep everything I'd earned, in other words. But it should have never gotten that far because he was clearly not the procuring cause of sale, right? He did originate a series of events, but there was a break in the continuity, right? First of all, he didn't get hired properly. He was never hired. And certainly didn't procure a ready, willing, and able buyer because he wasn't involved when the contract was made. But that's the kind of thing where this phrase can start getting tossed around. Procuring cause of sale. What's the definition? Originating a series of events without a break in continuity, resulting in a ready, willing, and able buyer procuring such thing. They like to test you on this one. If your license becomes inactive, what are the ways it can go inactive? If you don't do the education, for one, or you're not affiliated. But typically, if you're already affiliated, active broker, and you don't do the continuing education in time, your license is going to become inactive as of July 1st following. And so if you don't pay attention to that and you end up doing real estate, having that closing in July, even though your license has expired. By the way, when you go to a closing, the closing attorney doesn't ask to see your real estate license. They don't know if your license is expired or not. Your firm would, your broker in charge would, but you don't necessarily check in with your broker in charge for every single time, everything you do. So you could theoretically have a closing. Let's say that you forgot to do your CE by June 10th. That's when it's due. That's when the deadline is. Your license is still active on June 11th through 30th. It's just that on July 1st, you absolutely will become inactive. And so let's say you had a closing scheduled for July 3rd and your license went inactive on the 1st. Even if you were able to take the CE that you need to make up, odds are it won't get reported to the commission in time to get it reinstated active status. And so on July 3rd, your license is still inactive. You could theoretically show up to closing and do real estate without a license. And who would know? Your BIC might know once you brought that check back and you turned it in and they realized, wait a minute, I just saw that you went inactive. I thought you were working on it. Did you get that reinstated? And well, no. But it could kind of work and you could sort of do it. But if somebody found out, if the real estate commission found out, you would have broken this law, done real estate without a license, right? Could still have been done, but illegally. So Anytime our license is expired or inactive, we got to stop. What's the first thing you do if your license goes inactive? Don't do real estate. That's the best answer. Stop doing real estate. Some of you would answer, go find another firm or get it reinstated. But the first thing you have to do is stop doing real estate. Then you can go work on getting your license activated again. Expired is talking about the money. Got to pay that $45 renewal fee by June 30th. But your license has to be on active status whenever the commission was deemed to have been earned. This means, this is a weird phrasing, but what it means is if there's nothing left to do in the transaction except get it closed and your license goes inactive, you could still get the commission. If your license is inactive, you can't go to closing, but your BIC could for you. But then they could also pay you once your license gets activated again. You could, not even then. You could get paid with an inactive license because you've done all the work back when it was active. So you could get paid while on inactive status as long as you didn't do any real estate when it was inactive, as long as you did everything while it was still active. So there's that little nuance there. Your license had to be active when the commission was earned. Active means you're paid up, you got your education done, and you've sent them a form. The commission, they know that you're active and you have an active license. Current means you've paid the money. If you're not current, that means you're expired. Your license has expired. Talk about the practices of listing a property or working with a seller. Real Estate Commission says, here's what you need to do as a pre-listing activity. Here's what you need to collect. Get some documentation. You need to gather up these things. You need to try to get a copy of the seller's deed. Why is that important? Why is the seller's deed important? Why do we need to look at the deed? We could get it from the seller, but we could also look it up ourselves because it is a publicly accessed document. It's recorded. So you could do a search for that deed, but you want to see who's on the deed. Find out who are the owners that I need to get signatures from. Because on that deed, it might say spouses, but you're sitting there in front of just the husband or just the man. And you need to ask the question, well, I need your spouse's signature too if I'm going to list this property. Oh, well, we're pretty much divorced. Okay, what does that mean? Well, we've been separated for 10 years and it's pretty much my house. Okay, well, I can appreciate your personal relationship and that you're happy with each other, but separate. However, if you're still legally married, not officially divorced, I've got to have both your signatures. That's why you need to know it. You need to get to the bottom of who actually owns the place. And then let them know. It could be that just one of their names is on the deed, but they're happily married. Got to let them know, look, I'm going to need both of your signatures to close this thing, to sell this house. Both of you have to be in agreement to sell it. Well, I bought this place when I was just single. It's just me on the deed. Why do we both have to sign? Because you're in North Carolina. Because that's what it requires in North Carolina. But the phrase is it takes one signature to buy and two signatures to sell. So you need both spouses' agreement in writing, both of their signatures to sell. Or it might be an estate situation. Someone died. You're talking to one of the kids, one of the adult kids. How many siblings do you have? Oh, 10? How many of them are married? 8 of them are married. Okay, 10 siblings of the deceased and 8 of them are married. How many signatures do you think you need? 10 plus 8. Because the spouses of all the married ones plus all the kids themselves, right? 18. That listing agreement is only so big. There's actually an addendum you would use for for a whole bunch of other signatures in that situation. Also, a copy of the survey if they have it. What's the survey important for? What are we looking at that survey for? Why? What information will we find on it? Obviously, the shape of the house, the footprint of the house as it sits on the lot, but also on that survey are what? What sorts of things? Great. Good job. Easements, for sure. There's another E word on that survey too, potentially, about the property lines. Some sort of encumbrance in the form of an encroachment. There you go. Yeah. Is the building over the line, either the neighbors onto the subject property or the subject property stuff onto the neighbor's property. So, and then flood zones. Flood zones will be mentioned on that survey. It's just good to have it. Protective covenants and rules. We touched on that already, talking about private land use controls. If you live in a neighborhood with CC&Rs, covenants, conditions, and restrictions, those covenants, what are they? What is that potential buyer? What do they need to know? They may not want to even have they may want to have a fence on the property that's not allowed. They need to know that they can't just put any old fence, the cheapest option available. Maybe chain link is the cheapest, but they can't. They're going to have to spend more money and have the approved kind of fence, which is a white vinyl privacy fence might be the only one allowed in that neighborhood, or a metal, like aluminum picket fence or something. Or can the buyer operate a business out of the house in that neighborhood? Maybe not. Let's see what these rules are so we can provide them to the potential buyers. And then verifying the dues, if applicable. HOA dues, homeowner association dues, assessments. Maybe there's a special assessment that the homeowners association has put on all of the owners because maybe it's a gated community and they need to repave the roads and they didn't have enough money in the account to do the repaving, so they've got to make everybody pay for it. Everybody has to pay $200 a month for the next 3 years. We need to know what these assessments are. If that's a confirmed special assessment from the HOA, that means the seller has to pay it all in full from their proceeds if it's confirmed. If it's only being talked about, that's called a proposed special assessment. That's something the buyer's going to need to know about because they're going to be the one who has to pay it whenever it's actually official and confirmed. So regardless, you need to know what's coming if there's anything like that. What are the dues, the HOA charges, $200 a quarter maybe? How often do they charge it? And then also, that we also see this on the property disclosure. The question is there a fee that the seller has to pay to when they sell the property, an HOA fee? Or is there a fee the new buyer has to pay to set up the new account and become a new owner in this neighborhood? Both of those are possible. So all the better to know now so that you can do a seller net sheet and help that seller know what are you really going to get when you sell this property. Oh, you've got to pay this special assessment off. You still owe $4,500 on it. So from those proceeds, you're going to walk away with $150,000 minus another $4,500 because that's how much is left for that special assessment. So that's why you need to know these things. We're going to bring with us and provide the seller with some disclosures, that residential property disclosure, the mineral oil and gas rights disclosure, and the working with real estate agents disclosure. So that pre-listing meeting is all about talking about these disclosures. First step is this one, because if you're on a listing appointment, these types of information are coming up real quick. They're thinking about listing their house. You're here to list it for them. You need to hurry up and be able to protect their confidentiality. So don't tell me anything you don't want other agents to know. If they're shopping, not just interviewing you, but interviewing a couple more besides you, all the more important. That's the whole point. Hey, seller, don't tell me anything yet until you've made the right decision to hire me instead of them, right? Because I could very well bring the buyer for your house, and if you listed with one of those other brokers, fine, good luck to you. However, I'm going to have to tell my buyer whatever you tell me tonight. Or you could just hire me and not have to worry about any of it. We could just get this done. We're going to do some things, talk about the property, of course, in that pre-listing meeting. Tour the property. We're looking for material facts, right? We're looking for red flags, water problems, maybe leak stains on the ceiling, positive features of the property, improvements. Hey, why did you buy this house? Well, what do you think a buyer would care about? What are some sales points that we can use in our marketing? And oh, by the way, is there anything here that's screwed down, nailed down that you want to take with you? The chandelier in the dining room was your grandmother's and you're going to take it with you? Well, really the best course of action is let's go ahead and take it down and box it up and then put a cheaper one in its place so the buyer doesn't fall in love with it. Because odds are if you leave something up that you want to take with you, the buyer's going to want it. So let's don't even tempt them with it. So that's a great time to talk about this sort of thing. Or they might say, look, we're going to new construction. We want to build a new house. And so we're going to have a whole new appliance package with them. So we don't want these old mismatched appliances. We're just going to leave them here. We're going to leave the washer and dryer and refrigerator, which are typically personal property, but we'll include them with the house. So you're finding out what their goals are, what their motivations are, what they want to accomplish. And my favorite listing appointment method, my favorite listing presentation, I should say, it could certainly be a fancy iPad presentation, a PowerPoint maybe on the iPad where you show your sales figures and your firm's sales figures and rankings and your marketing plan. It could be a flip book, a printed out flip book. It depends on who it is, right? Some people their eyes are going to glaze over if they see a big fat 3-ring binder come out of your briefcase, or even if they see an iPad coming out and you bring up a PowerPoint, they're going to be like, oh boy, what are they selling me and how long is this going to take? But it just depends. You need to know your audience. But my favorite way to start a listing appointment is to maybe have that iPad or that binder or whatever or a folder with the information ready. I don't bring it out yet, but I'll just sit there with a little notebook, a little blank pad of paper. And what I want to do is just say, what is your pain point? What are you worried most about in this situation? What can I help you with? Why are we here? Why do you need to sell your house? And then be quiet, because then they'll start talking to you about what they're worried most about in this whole process. And then you can make the appropriate promises, ones that you're going to and are willing to deliver, of course, but get right down to what it is that you need to do for them to make them want to pick you over those other guys, right? Maybe the other ones didn't even ask them these questions. The other ones just started. We get so caught up in talking and not listening, especially in sales. I think it's important to position ourselves to listen. Hey guys, what are you trying to accomplish here? How can I help you do that? What are your goals? What's more important to you, the price that you get for the house or the time frame? Do you need to get it sold sooner? Maybe because your company is going to buy out your house, like they're transferring you for a job. And if you don't get it sold on your own within 60 days, they'll do a company buyout so that you can go on and move out there. But that buyout might be lower than what you could get on the open market if you do it yourself. Therefore, you want to get it sold sooner than later, because selling it sooner on your own is still going to give you more money than what the company is going to buy you out for. Maybe that's the situation. But you'll never know until you ask. So let's get it on out there. And then I'm just taking notes here and there. And then let's go look at the house. And then after I've learned their personality type, that they are maybe a very detail oriented and they're going to want to see every single page, every single number. Okay, then I'll bring it out, show it. But if they're the other personality type that's like, just tell me the bottom line. I don't need to know the why or the how. Just tell me, what's it going to sell for and what do you do? And can we get this done? You're going to want to cut 80% of that normal presentation and get right down to the answers for that type of personality, because they're going to glaze over. Or if it's the warm and fuzzy in the DISC personality profile, and there's different personality profiles, but it's the S type. That's that sweet, warm, fuzzy. Family is important. feel good, feel safe is their motivation. You're going to want to make sure that you give them whatever they need to feel secure and comfortable that you're going to be the one for this job to carry this out and that they're not going to feel vulnerable, right? So knowing those couple little things can help you a lot. Of course, you're going to talk about what you'll do for them. We'll get into that when we come back, and I'll see you in 10 minutes.
teased about an in-person social we were planning in the near future. Well, I'm back to talk about it. If you're not aware, which hopefully you
Welcome back. There we go. Okay, we're talking about this pre-listing meeting. So yeah, we're going to talk about the marketing plan. That's one of the reasons they're wanting to talk to you, is to see what do you do differently. How will you get my house sold for probably top dollar in a reasonable time frame? And that includes brokerage fees. What do you charge? What's the standard of what's the industry standard? Oh, sorry, can't answer that. That's an impossible thing to answer because there is no standard. Commissions are negotiable, but here's what I would charge. I am not a fan of answering that question too soon, though, as you know. I want to find out what they're trying to accomplish. What do I have to work with here? How reasonable will they be? If they're setting me up to fail or setting me up to have to take longer to get it sold because of maybe an overpriced situation, or do I really think they're going to put it in the right condition it needs to be in to sell? If I'm questioning those things, I might need to get paid more. And what might also be revealed is, where do you stand, Mr. Seller? What do you owe on the property? What's your loan balance? And because of how much it's going to cost to sell their house, how much commission I charge them might be affected by how much they've got to walk away with. What if they tell me, look, I need to walk away with $80,000 to buy my next one, and my loan balance is $220,000. I got to pay off my loan. And you're charging, what's your commission rate? Okay. Well, if all of that adds up to a number that is not a reasonable sale price for houses like this one, then you may just need to excuse yourself and go away because it's impossible. You're not getting $80,000 at the end of the day, Mr. and Ms. Seller, in this market. In order to sell for what this house is worth and pay my commission and pay off your loan and end up with this number you say you need, it's not going to happen. And you need to know this because maybe you would be willing to adjust your commission a little bit to make it happen. Maybe if it's off by a couple thousand, you would charge something appropriately to make it still work, especially if they're going to go somewhere else and use you to be the buyer agent. If you can double dip, help them sell this one and also help them buy the next one, yeah, I would do it. I would consider negotiating them down a little more than what I would normally charge to help them sell in order to make it all work, right? But now's how you find that out. Now's when you find that out. Find out what their situation is. Of course, got to remember this. Industry can't set commissions. The commission is here. This is what I charge. It's negotiable. There's no industry standard. And the buyer agent compensation, that amount we're going to give to another agent to maybe bring buyers for your house, that needs to be determined here on this listing appointment too. Because we're going to not only tell them the total commission we're charging them, but we're going to say, well, then here's how much I propose that we give to the other agent, if there is one. Maybe I'll bring the buyer myself and I'll be the only agent because of dual agency, or even just it's an unrepresented buyer and I'm the only agent. But what if the great likelihood happens, which is that the buyer comes from another broker, from another firm? How much of this 6% commission that I'm charging you are we going to give to them? And maybe it's a halfway split. Maybe it's going to be 3 and 3. I'll charge you, seller, a total of 6. I'll keep 3, me and my firm, and I'll give 3 to the other firm. Or might be an uneven split. Hey, Mr. and Ms. Seller, I spend a lot of money up front listing a property at all. It's all my risk. Your house you could even choose not to sell at some point, and I could let you out of the listing agreement if that's something you and your firm decide to do. So the risk is all mine. Therefore, I will charge you a total of 6% commission, but I'm getting 3.5%, and I'm giving 2.5% to the other party. I'm giving 2.5% to the buyer agent. Are you okay with that? You and the seller, based on what you're willing to do and what your firm will let you do, will make that decision. How much are you going to share with a potential other cooperating broker from another firm? It may not be half and half. If it's not half and half, be ready, because sometimes that other broker, if they were to find out, they'll be a little fussy, but it's their problem, right? Here's the thing as a buyer agent. From a buyer agent's perspective, how do we get paid? Probably from the seller. However, as we'll see when we look at the buyer agency agreement later, it actually says in the buyer agency agreement, I'll probably get paid from the seller's side of the transaction, but I still owe everything to you, all of old car, Mr. and Ms. Buyer. Probably getting paid from the seller, but if the seller only pays me a fraction of what I'm worth or what I charge, you, the buyer, have to pay me the difference. What if when you're a buyer agent for somebody, you charge 3%? It's just what you and your firm have decided that you charge as a buyer agent doing buyer agent things. I'll help you buy a house. If that seller will give me a buyer agency fee of 3%, we're in good shape. But what if that seller only gives me a 2.5% buyer agency commission? Then I'm going to need that other 0.5% from you, buyer client. So when you're talking to that buyer in your upfront initial consultation, here's when you explain to them how the whole commission is routed. Probably getting paid by the seller, but if for some reason they don't pay me enough, I'm going to look to you to make up the difference. You could do that, or you could just risk it and say, well, if it's close enough, I'll just let it go and just hope that they refer more business to me in the future. But again, these are business decisions, but here's when you talk about these things. So what they mean here by cooperative compensation in MLS, I think we looked at it. If we're not, let's take a look. The multiple listing service, bottom of the page, tells you what you're going to earn as a buyer agent. It says for any given listing, how much is going to go to the buyer agent versus a sub-agent to seller. So here's what one looks like, and I'll bet okay, good. So here's any given, just a random listing in a neighborhood in North Charlotte. You scroll down to the bottom. I think we looked at this before, but as a buyer agent, you bring a buyer for this listing, you're going to get 2.5% of the sale price, whatever that ends up being, you and your firm. What if you've chosen to only work for 3 or better? Well, here's a classic case. Hey, buyer, this seller only pays me 2.5%, but I work for 3. Just to let you know, I'm going to look to collect that other 0.5% of the sale price from you. I'm getting 2.5 from the seller, so that's good. I'm getting most of it from them, but I'm going to need more to finish it out coming from you. And as we're scrolling through, just curious, I'm seeing a lot of 2.5s so far. There's a 1. Wow. 2.5. But then here's one at 1%. It's negotiable. But here's a listing. It's not much of a different size house. It's $475 asking price. So were some of those others in that same range. But because they've chosen to do this, this seller is willing to pay the buyer agent a fee of 1%. 1.5% less than most of those other ones. I might take that buyer agency agreement up on that provision with this one. I'm used to doing it for maybe 2.5%, 3%. I might have a problem with 1 just personally from a business point of view. So this would be a great example to show that buyer, look, buyer, I'm getting 1% on this one from the seller. Therefore, I'm going to need 2.5 more from you, or 2 more from you, or 1.5 more from you, or whatever. Right? That's how it works. There's a 2. So we saw lots of 2.5s. We saw a 1, and we saw this 2, and there's a 2.25. So it's all negotiable. All different ones do different things. It's all good, but just make sure you're good with whatever they're paying. You could also charge them a retainer fee, whether you're helping them as a buyer agent or helping them as a listing agent. You could charge them an upfront retainer fee, like an attorney does. If you're good enough. What does that mean? Well, if they'll pay it. And they're probably more likely to pay it if you maybe have a reputation, if you're known, if you're referred, and they really want to work with you specifically instead of just any random real estate broker, probably going to have a better shot. If you have a track record, oh, this is how I do it, this is how this works, and I've got a proven success rate of such and such. So a retainer fee would be a fee for services paid up front, and it might even be they pay it to you up front, but you'll credit that back to them, and it'll be that much less than they have to pay you at the end. But what they're paying you at the end would be called a success fee. paid upon closing. That's what you're really working for. The bulk of it is a success fee. You successfully did what you were planning to do, either helping them buy or helping them sell. When it comes to the fees, there's also the difference between a multiple firm, a two firm versus an in-house sale. So a co-brokered sale means there's competing firms cooperating in the sale. That's the whole point of the MLS, is to put the word out to other firms to bring their buyers too. Instead of me just trying to match up one of my few buyers for one of my few listings. There's way more listings and buyers on those other firms. So that's what makes the MLS work. And we just saw how that compensation that's offered in the MLS looks. That'd be a co-brokerage sale when it's more than one firm. An in-house sale, same firm, but it's going to depend on how the firm handles it in their policy and procedures manual. How do we handle an in-house sale? Who gets paid what? What are the splits? There's different types of listing agreements too, and they all hinge around, does the broker get paid or not, depending on who brings the buyer. So, an open listing contract, you need to know these three in particular. An open listing contract is not something we do here. I've heard that they do it this way in England. A seller can list with more than one firm, and it's just the firm who actually brings the buyer that ends up getting paid. If the owner finds the buyer, no broker gets paid. The owner doesn't have to pay a commission at all because it was the owner who found the buyer. So it's sort of like your time, your effort is not really protected as a broker here. With an open listing contract, only the firm bringing the buyer gets paid. Multiple firms, multiple signs could show up in a yard. Again, we don't do it this way, but that's what this is. An exclusive agency listing agreement. If it's called an exclusive agency listing agreement, it means that one firm lists the property, and if that firm brings the buyer, or if one of the cooperating firms in the MLS brings the buyer, in either of those cases, the seller is going to pay the commission. They will pay the commission. But if the seller manages to find their own buyer without the agent being involved, then the seller doesn't have to pay a commission at all. Again, not great. Doesn't give the broker much incentive unless they're up for a challenge, right? They could spend their time, their money, doing all that we do up front with the listing, and then maybe the seller works like an hour away, drives an hour away to their job. And so they make their own little homemade flyer and they put it on a bulletin board in the lunchroom at work. And there's no chance that broker would ever have a way to contact any of those coworkers and find them as a buyer. And so that owner finds a coworker who wants to buy their house, and they do. Well, the broker doesn't get paid for that. The owner legitimately found their own buyer. Had nothing to do with the efforts of the broker. Therefore, under an exclusive agency listing agreement, broker doesn't get paid. Not great for us, huh? Here's the best one. Best one for the broker is frankly the best one for the seller too, because the broker is going to be incentivized to bust their tail getting this thing accomplished. One firm lists the property. And if it's the actual listing firm that brings the buyer, because maybe it's an unrepresented buyer that calls them, or if it's a cooperating firm that brings the buyer, some other broker at some other firm makes an appointment and says, I want to come show your house to my buyer. Or even if the seller brings the buyer themselves, has nothing to do with the agent knowing that buyer, that it was just because the seller found the buyer all by themselves. Any of those three things happen, the commission still gets paid. The listing firm still gets paid. Exclusive right to sell. We have an exclusive right to sell listing agreement. Broker gets paid no matter where the buyer comes from, even if it's the seller who brings the buyer. Total protection for the listing firm. Best one tends to be the only one that we do in the MLS that we're a member of here. So the big difference, besides the open listing agreement, was that sort of free-for-all. Whoever sells it gets paid. If the owner sells it by themselves, no commission gets paid. If the one of multiple firms who has listed it gets the buyer, that's who gets paid. But again, we don't do it that way. But the remaining exclusive versions, either exclusive agency or exclusive right. What's the difference? With exclusive agency, there's a shot that the broker doesn't get paid if the seller brings their own buyer. But with an exclusive right to sell, the firm always gets paid, even if the seller finds the buyer by themselves. Because frankly, even if the seller does find the buyer themselves, there's still work to be done that the broker needs to do. Because they still have to, if it's an unrepresented buyer, the broker would still be the resource for the forms and help them understand how to make the offer and communicate back and forth between the parties. And then got to let inspectors in and maybe repair people in for estimates, whether it's for the buyer or for the seller. Who's going to be looked to do that? The broker, if it's an unrepresented buyer. So they're earning it. They're definitely earning it. It's not like they're just sitting around and the seller brought the buyer by themselves and the broker just says, well, I'll see you at closing for my check. That's not what's happening. They're doing work. Something called the protection agreement is the thing that when it's a for sale by owner, or another way to say that is an unrepresented seller. For sale by owner is an unrepresented seller, no agent, doing it themselves. There's a form for that. It's a FSBO form. It's called an unrepresented seller disclosure and fee agreement. In addition to the working with agents disclosure, there's also this one, which is the thing that says how much the FSBO will pay the broker, the buyer agent. Hey, I'm bringing my buyer to see your for sale by owner house. Will you pay me a commission if I do that? Will you pay me a buyer agency fee? How much is a buyer agency fee? Less than a full listing fee, because you're not listing your house. You are your listing agent. I just want the other part, right? If you were to list your house with a broker, might very well be that it's a 5% fee, 2.5% to your listing agent, and then the other 2.5% to the buyer agent. Well, I just want that other 2.5% because I'm not your listing agent. I'm just helping the buyer. Now, frankly, you are doing more work. You're probably doing a little more work, but you're probably just going to be happy with that buyer agent fee. And the important part about this protection agreement, this unrepresented seller thing, is there's no agency agreement between the buyer agent and the seller. It's acknowledging, look, you are unrepresented seller. I'm taking care of the buyer. Don't tell me anything you don't want the buyer to know. And oh, by the way, you're agreeing to pay me a commission. What if that seller, this for sale by owner seller, refuses to agree to pay you a buyer agency fee? What are some options? What's the other option for you to get paid if the seller won't pay you? You got it. It's your only choice. Tell the buyer, okay, here's how for sale by owners work. I can absolutely help you, and I will try to get them to pay me. But if they won't pay me, you're going to have to pay me because I'm doing this to help you, right? It's all about making sure you're squared away. And between you and me in the break room, we're all standing around the break room just talking shop, you and me, you guys right now and me. Typically for sale by owner sellers seem to be overpriced. They don't have guidance on pricing properly. And then they, of course, why would they? They don't have the forms needed. They're either going to have to get them from an attorney or buy the generic ones from the office supply store. Neither of them are ideal. The attorney's probably going to charge a lot. And what do they really have? So, and then there's nobody to guide them. I've even seen on when you schedule a closing, the attorney will send both brokers, the listing agent and the buyer agent. They'll send them an information sheet that you have to fill out for your client, so the attorney knows what this closing is about and who it's between. And I've seen some attorneys put on that information sheet, hey, if you are an unrepresented buyer, our attorney fee is increased by another $500. Basically, because we're going to have to do stuff that your agent would normally do, and we're not doing it for free. We're going to have to hold your hand through this thing more than we normally would, because an agent normally would be handling so many things. So that's what this protection agreement is about. Getting from that for sale by owner that they're going to pay you, getting that in writing, and getting the extra disclosure that, look, don't tell me secrets because I can't keep them. I'm not your person. Another type of listing that you could do that's out there in the market, it's not a type of listing agreement, but it's sort of it's what you're offering up. Anybody ever heard or seen agents advertise that they'll do a flat fee, or you can just put it in the MLS? Some brokers will do what's called a limited service arrangement. What you can't call this, we're not allowed to call this a discount broker. A broker who charges a lower commission because all they're doing is maybe putting it in the MLS and that's it. They're not taking pictures. They're not even showing it. They're not even involved in the negotiating or presenting of offers. In fact, if it's a limited service agreement, it'll show up in the MLS and it'll say in the comments section that the all offers are to be made directly to the seller, to the owner. Don't call the listing agent because this is a limited services agreement. Any negotiating, any offers, all communication is to be between the buyer agent directly to the seller. That's allowed, but what's happening is that seller has chosen to hire a limited service broker. They just want one specific thing from that broker. And maybe the broker will offer them like a menu of services. Maybe they'll say, for this flat fee, I'll put you in the MLS. Oh, you want pictures? Well, then that's going to be another few bucks. Oh, you want me to handle the showings, or you want me to negotiate for you? That's going to be another little bit. So could kind of come out like that, but usually what someone who hires a limited service broker, what they really want is just that MLS access. Put my listing on the MLS. That's all I want to pay you for. But there's plenty of brokers that won't do it. They'll say, I don't do limited service because it's too. Sometimes the issue with it is the seller gets angry, annoyed. They think the broker's not doing their end or holding up their end. They should be doing more than they're really doing. So got to be real clear. What are you paying me for? Putting you in the MLS? Well, just so you know, that's it. That's all I'm giving you. You're paying me a lower amount because I'm giving you that one thing. But how does that affect us brokers who are helping buyers, and our buyer wants to buy a limited service listing? Well, guess what? It's almost like doing a for sale by owner sale, because that listing broker isn't all that involved. You're really interfacing with that for sale by owner directly yourself. Do you get extra for that? Probably not. You're getting your buyer agency fee. That limited services agreement is between that seller and that listing agent. And it's just saying I'm doing less for you and I'm charging you less to get it. But since you as a buyer agent are interacting with that seller directly, got to be real careful about this agency thing. Again, they're going to love you because you're great. Don't let them tell you secrets. Make sure they know. Keep it to yourself. I'm for the buyer, not for you, even though I'm really kind of holding this whole thing down. But the other part about this limited services agreement is just because they're limiting the services provided doesn't mean that listing agent can limit the responsibilities. They're still held to the same standard by the Real Estate Commission. They've got to still provide old car. And it's weird. It sounds weird. It's like, well, limited service, why do they have to still give all of obedience, loyalty, disclosure, confidentiality, accounting, reasonable skill and care? Can't some of that be lessened, limited? Well, no. They still have to provide all of that. But a case could be made it's not as easy to provide all of that if they're not plugged into every phase of the transaction. If the buyer agent is communicating directly with the seller, it might be kind of easy for some of those old car things to get blurry, a little bit smoky, a little blurry, hard to, if that listing agent isn't as involved in every aspect. But that's the risk. So you just got to be real careful. So limited services listing agreements limit the services provided, but they don't limit the responsibilities the broker has for their seller, the listing broker. Then we have cooperation. In the multiple listing service, that's the whole point. Members to the MLS, we subscribe to the MLS. I believe it's like a couple $100 a quarter to belong to the multiple listing service. Depends if you're your own firm or if you're a broker in charge or not. but that's what spells out what each member is going to pay. I'm going to pay you, a buyer agent, this amount because you are a fellow subscriber to the MLS. And what the shared amount is going to show up like we saw at the bottoms of all those pages. Why are we using MLS? Obviously for exposure, right? Usually it's all about more eyes because all those brokers who are subscribers have way more buyers than any one of them do. And then it is also an excellent source for sales data, comparable sales data. It shows what's active, of course. It shows what has sold. It shows this thing called pending or under contract. And then it even shows the listings that didn't succeed in selling, that expired from the market. The ones that, remember, we have to put an expiration date on all agency agreements. So when that listing expires, then automatically, as of the expiration date, it doesn't show up as active anymore. It shows up as expired. And that whole list of all the listings that expired today are going to get phone calls from brokers who are always looking for expired listings because they're going to call them and say, oh, I see that your previous agent didn't succeed in selling your house. Would you like for me to help you get it sold? I'll do better than they did or whatever. So pursuing the expired listings is a very real thing for trying to get business. And then sometimes people just decide not to sell anymore. And so in that case, they would ask the listing firm, could you withdraw my listing from the MLS? Would you let me out of the agreement? And then withdraw it from the MLS. That's what those mean. So it's just an excellent database. We can see what buyers have been willing to pay for houses like this one. That's how we determine what this one will probably sell for. And it's got all the information. It's better than tax records because it's got current and lots of information. Well, let me just show you firsthand. We've got everything from types of plumbing to, of course, acreage size. Let's get to a big one. Those are more fun. Look at this active one. So these guys are asking $504,000, upper right corner over here, and shows the county it's in. In this particular neighborhood, it could be in Cabarrus or Mecklenburg, straddles the line. It shows the legal description right up there, front and center. That's important to know. It shows the lot size. It shows what kind of lot is it. It happens to be a cul-de-sac lot. We've got tax value over here. And then a whole big display about the square footage. How many square feet is where? 1625 on the main level, 1428 on the upstairs, nothing that's not heated. If there was a basement, we would spell that out, list that out separately. Built in 2002 with this many bedrooms and bathrooms, and there might be some school information, maybe not. Depends on if the agent put it in there or not. They don't have to. In this case, it's a vacant home. Might be interesting to know because maybe you could get this one closed quicker since there's no seller that has to move out. So maybe you only do a search for vacant homes because your buyer needs to hurry up, really is in a big hurry. It also shows things like the type of financing the seller is willing to entertain. They'll take cash, but they'll also take a conventional loan. They'll take a government-related loan like an FHA or VA, which we'll make more sense of in a couple more chapters. But the reason this matters is when it's an FHA or VA loan, the appraisal gets more strict. If the house needs to be in a better condition for FHA or VA than it does for conventional. And if the roof is old, probably not going to get an FHA loan unless the seller's willing to put a new roof on it. Well, good luck finding a seller willing to put a new roof on it. In this case, the seller's saying, yeah, I'm confident that the things an FHA appraiser is going to care about are not going to be an issue here. Probably has a decent newer roof. I'll bet it's not the original roof. If we were to look into the disclosure, we'd probably see that it is, that it is a newer than original roof. Interesting. When was the roof installed? They don't know. Well, that's a risk on their behalf. They really should change that from FHA, I think. And then down here, turns out they decreased the price. And then here's all the stuff. Where are the bedrooms located, bathrooms? Which levels of the property? Is it a slab foundation? What appliances are included? Is it city water and sewer? Is there a homeowners association? And if so, how much? Right there in the middle. And then the remarks section is where you can really get some good info. If they've got new stuff, they will brag about it in the remarks section. If they don't talk about new things, it's probably not. Doesn't have much replaced HVAC, heating and air system, replaced water heater, things like that. It's been on for 123 days, which says to me, my first guess when I see that is they priced it wrong. And so if we look here, the oldest listing on this one was at 516,000. And then they dropped to 510 after about 90 days, and then they dropped to 504. I'll bet this house is not worth over 500,000, because if it's been sitting that long, there's a reason, and it's probably price. And then of course the pictures. You can have, I think, up to 40. It depends on the MLS. Oh wow, that almost looks fake. But some pictures are better than others. Can usually figure out why something hasn't sold if you look at it a little more deeply. But that data sheet is gold, right? That's where we get all the info we need to know about the market. And then statistics can be based upon all of these things from this data sheet. There are reports that you can get showing what has sold, how long it took, what's the ratio of the asking price to the sale price, sales to list price ratio, how much of what it was asking did it actually sell for? Who's responsible for what's put on this form? What's put in the MLS? The listing firm, the listing broker. Yeah. So that's who enters it, or somebody on their behalf because they've hired them to. But it's ultimately the listing firm and the licensee that are responsible for the accuracy. It better be accurate. And if it's not, they're the ones who are liable for it. Okay, we've talked about some of this other stuff. That listing agreement has to have all the parties' names, of course, the term of the agreement, including the expiration, as we saw. What is it? What's the property? Need a legal description, but also anything else about the property, a tax parcel ID. The street address is not a legal description, but that needs to be on there too. And then what else does a listing agreement tend to have? This stuff too, the bottom of the page, the price, right? The list price, the brokerage fee. What do we pay in the broker? The protection clause, and then cooperation. How much are we going to pay another firm to bring a buyer if that's what happens? The fees are calculated as a percentage of the sale price, but it could also be a flat fee. If it's one of those limited service listings, it could be, I'll list your house for $500, put it in the MLS for you, and that's all I'm doing as the listing agent. So it could be that flat fee. It could be a percent of the sale price, which is what we're most used to seeing, but it could also be something called a net fee. The firm keeps a certain amount over whatever the seller's desired minimum net is. So if the seller says, look, I just need to get $100,000 out of this. If you can sell it for $150,000, then you can keep the 50. I just need the 100. Or if you can sell it for $115,000, then $15,000 is your commission. I just need the $100,000. That's not ideal, because the real estate commission says, is the firm really being honest with them about what the property is worth, or are they going to try to sort of stack the deck in their favor and tell them it's really only worth $90,000, but I managed to sell it for $120,000. The broker's going to get $30,000. But if they tell the truth that it's really worth $100,000 and they're able to sell it, or it's really worth $115,000 and they're able to sell it for $120,000, then all the broker's getting is the $5,000. How much more than what the seller wanted to net? So it's just a little more room for kind of nonsense, for misbehavior, I guess. Typically, it's one of those first two items is the way the fee works. What's the firm expected to do in this listing agreement with this seller? Obviously advertise, but certainly show the property to potential buyers, give advice to the seller about the process, negotiating the upfront offers, but then also later in the under contract period, once you have a buyer, they're going to get it inspected. And now that's another set of negotiating. That's another stage because the buyer's probably going to ask for things to be repaired. And the seller needs to say, I'll fix this, but not that. And they're leaning on the broker to help them understand, should I say yes or not? Or should I maybe, instead of fixing things, because seller may not want to take their time to fix it, or maybe it's going to take longer to fix it than we have to before the closing happens. So let's just give the buyer money instead of fixing things. Now, they're going to look to that agent to help them navigate through all of those negotiations. And then, of course, as a broker, we have to disclose material facts. But out of this whole list of what the firm's duties are, there's something missing that you might have noticed. There's not anywhere in this list something that says the firm's duty is to get the house sold. One of the firm's duties is to sell the property. No, the point of the listing is to try to sell the property, make an attempt, make their best effort to sell it. They're not guaranteeing they'll sell it. That's not listed in their duties. They're going to try using these things, and they're going to provide these services along the way. Since it's an agency agreement, we've got to have that fair housing language in there. Let me take a look at that since we've got it close by. Here we go. Here is a listing agreement. We'll look. Oh, sorry. There we go. Here's a listing agreement. We'll take a closer look tomorrow. But let's scroll on down and we'll find the fair housing language as it shows up in all of the agency agreements. There it is. Can't miss it. All bold, all caps. This firm will conduct all their brokerage activity without respect to race, color, religion, sex, national origin, handicap, and familial status of any party or prospective party. Also, as part of the sex category, realtors have an ethical duty to conduct such activities without respect to sexual orientation or gender identity. In other words, the realtor code of ethics included these additional two: sexual identity, sexual orientation, gender identity, but under the original federal fair housing list, that is also considered to be a part of the sex category. So in other words, everybody should have a fair shot at real estate. Let's not give any preferential or positive or negative treatment based on those protected classes. And we'll see that also in the buyer agency agreement, any even property management, tenant representation, any agency agreement, they all have to have it. Okay. What's the seller responsible for? We know what the firm is responsible for. The seller's duties include these: allow showings. Sometimes sellers aren't great at that. They get a little finicky. They say, well, I'm busy. We've got a busy household and I got a job and I work at night. So long as the showings can be on Tuesdays or Thursdays between 3 and 3:30, that's an extreme. If they said that to me, I would say, do you really need to get this sold? Because it might be hard to show it for 1 hour a week in 2 30-minute intervals. Might be a fruitless endeavor. I don't see much point in trying, really. Need to get a little more flexibility there. So allowing the showings is good. You might have it so that sometimes the seller might have turned down a showing, and I get notified when the showings declined, and I'll reach out to them and I'll say, hey, what's going on? Maybe it's just because they can't get home to get the dog in the crate. And if I'm cool with the dog, I'll offer to do it. If it means another showing, that could be the one that matters, right? So it just lets you fix little problems that don't need to be problems. We need them to allow as many showings as we can. That's one of the upfront speeches I give. In the end, and when we first get the listing, I'll say, look, guys, let's get this done. Best chance of it is be as flexible as you can. The sooner we get it under contract, the sooner you're back to normal life. So willing to get inconvenienced those first few days as possible so that we can hurry up and get as many showings and get it sold, get it under contract, then there won't be a parade of people coming through. Yes, there will be some inspections and this and that, but not like a showing any random day. So help me help you, right? Allow those showings. Keep the property presentable. Oh boy, that might be way different than how they normally live. Some people live in a house and it looks like it's an open house all the time. It's just the way they are. My wife would be that way. I am not that way. We have different sections of the house. This little room I'm in is sort of my little man cave space. So she's not worried about keeping this place neat. And sometimes it's neat and sometimes it's not. When I'm listing it, if I'm trying to sell this place and show it any random day, you got to make sure you talk to them about that. Look, guys, what's our game plan? What's the laundry plan, the dirty dishes plan? If a showing is requested for in the next hour or two, could you pull it off? Could you be out of here with a decent showability? That's part of their duties. Provide necessary documents. The attorney's going to need some things. You're going to need some things. Can they give those things that are needed in a timely fashion? And then cooperate and actually pay the brokers as promised. We'll talk about the rest of the listing agreement tomorrow. So we'll finish up this 8, get on into 9 tomorrow, and I think we might get into 9 tomorrow. We're going to look at the forms. I have the forms in the Google Drive. If you want to look at the listing agreement and try to find the part that talks about commission, that'd be sort of some informal homework I would like for you to do. Take a look at that listing agreement. See if you can find the money portions, where the total commission is, and then how much they're paying a buyer agent and a sub agent. And we'll talk about that some more tomorrow. Other than that, put your name in the chat for me. Let me know if you have any questions, and I will see you tomorrow.